You're about to learn everything there is to learn about the Caro Kan defense. I'm going to be showing you all the moves, all the theoretical ideas. Like once you play this, once you see this, the moves that you're going to be seeing is they're either going to take the pawn. This is called the exchange version. They're going to push the pawn to e5. This is called the advanced version. Or they're going to play knight d2 or knight c3 to protect the knight. And this is usually the line where you want to play. This is like the classical Tartakova variation of the Caro Kan. Some persons may not take the knight and they're going to try the alien gambit. But if someone plays the alien gambit, just play h6, they sack their knight and develop the knight. The only thing that you need to remember is the winning move in the alien gambit is c5. Once you play c5, apply a lot of pressure to his d4 pawn, develop your pieces normally, and you're just going to be playing ahead by a piece. The one that you're going to be seeing most is the exchange variation of the Caro Kan. All you need to remember is develop your knights. After you develop your knights, you develop your bishops. And there's a lot of times when this knight is the main defender of this pawn. So you could either, let's say they play h3, you could eliminate the knight, which is the main defender of the pawn, and win the pawn. But if they see all of this, let's say they finish their development, you go e6, you develop your bishop, and you're going to simply castle your king, put your rook on the c file, and play on the queen side. If they play the advanced variation of the Caro Kan, I like this move pawn c5 because now we're just going to be targeting their d4 pawn. And if they ever take the pawn, like we should be able to play e6 and just take back the pawn, because if they try to play something like b4, we have a5, and it's never going to be good for them to play a6 due to this pin on the background. With that being said, they usually play moves like pawn c3. We're going to be targeting their d4 pawn. If the knight goes to f3, we go bishop g4. And we like to play bishop to g4 and target this knight because it's the main defender of the d pawn. And then after this, like we take on d4, we play e6. This knight on g7 usually goes from e7 to f5 to target the d4 pawn. This bishop usually goes to e7. We castle the king and we play a good game. Now, if they defend the pawn, you play knight f6. We already looked on the alien gambit. If they take, this is the Tartakov variation. The main theoretical line is to play c3 to defend the pawn, bishop d6, white plays bishop to d3, black simply castles the king. And after this queen c2 move trying to target h7, you should play h5, not h6 or g6, h5. Because now, after knight e2, you go rook to e8, just pinning the knight. You could also check the king right here before you play h5. It's going to be the same scenario. And once white castle, you play h4. Our plan is to play h3. For example, if they play a weird move, we play h3, and they have a bunch of light square weaknesses around their king. If they play h3, we're going to play knight to d7, knight to f8, and from here, after something like rook to d1, you want to play moves like bishop to e6. Let's play pawn to c4, queen d7, knight c3, sack on h3, and black usually always win these types of position. In fact, this is a brilliant move. I'm going to be walking you guys through all rating levels from 500 to 2000. Watch the full video, apply what I teach, and your ratings will go through the Picking things off in the 500 region. Today I'm going to be showing you guys the Caro Kan defense. It starts with c6, and basically you're going to play pawn to d5 regardless of what they play. My opponent plays pawn to d3, which is not usually good, by the way. Usually we want to take on e4, but it doesn't really change a lot. So let's just continue to develop our pieces. Pawn to d4, chasing away his knight, forcing his knight to move again. That would have actually been a good idea. Now, let's actually go with that plan. Let's go pawn to d4. Let's force the knight to move. And then once the knight moves to e2, we play pawn c5, knight c6, pawn e5. And we're going to have this massive space advantage. And the opponent is going to have a very bad light squared bishop. So the knight went back to e2. There's two pieces attacking my pawn on d4. Let's play pawn c5, guarding the pawn on d4. And usually the move here is pawn to c3. It doesn't really do much. I'm still going to develop. Bishop to f4 was played. Let's just keep developing our pieces. And I'm trying to play e5 here. E5 is going to be hard because he has two pieces covering the e5 square, and I only have my knight covering the e5 square. So in order for me to play e5, I need to add additional protection of e5 or remove one of the pieces that he has guarding e5. But then he decides to play pawn to e5 himself, which looks like a good move. But the thing is, I'm not going to pull my knight back. I'm going to move my knight forward. And then moving my knight forward also attacks his bishop on f4. I mean, the bishop is guarded though, so it's not like he's about to lose material. I'm expecting him to move the bishop or maybe play queen to d2. My plan from here is to go bishop g4, just finishing my development. The whole idea is to ensure that we get all the pieces out as quickly as we possibly can. So he did go queen to d2. Let's just finish our development here. Let's go bishop g4, applying some pressure to the knight. I'm trying to play moves like e6, bishop e7, castle the king, just the quickest way to get all minor pieces out and the king castle. If the opponent decided to castle the king, I mean, everything is still guarded for them. So let me just continue with my development. Pawn e6, bishop e7, castle. It's also going to be opposite side castles, and I'm not sure if you guys understand. Whenever there's opposite side castles, which means you castle on one side and the opponent castle on the other side, it's usually always going to be a crazy game. And then both sides are going to be attacking the opponent's king. Bishop to g5, that's a decent move. I mean, the plan was to play bishop to e7 anyway, so let's just finish our development. He's the one who's moving the same piece more than once in the opening. Plus, I have an additional idea. The fact that this pawn on e5 is only guarded by the knight, anytime I'm able to give up my bishop for this knight, there's not going to be anything guarding the pawn. So you could also say I'm threatening or removing the guard tactic. H3 to attack the bishop is just a very bad move. Because for one, the knight is like one of the main defender of the bishop. If I take the knight, he shouldn't even take back because now I have two pieces attacking his bishop. So he has to find an in-between move, which was to take my bishop. He didn't find the move, which means we're just going to take his bishop. And just like that, he lost a piece. I mean, this is going to happen in the 500 region. Pawn to f4 is what I'm expecting. After pawn to f4, I'm just going to move my bishop, keeping it on the same diagonal as the queen and the king. Maybe he thinks I'm pinning his queen and his queen is pinned, but there is f4 here. So he finds f4. Let's pull the bishop back. His f pawn is pinned because it's on the same line as the queen. The queen is on the same line as the king. And remember what we said about pin pieces. Pin pieces does not protect. With that being said, this pawn on e5 is still unprotected. So even though he moves his king out the way, I'm still able to take on e5. Because if he takes on e5, then he's just going to lose his queen. But then he decides to not move the queen, and then he moves the rook. But then the queen and the rook is just in the perfect pattern for a fork here. So he also missed this fork, and he has to be careful. Like, C1 is actually the underscore for the queen. Like, there's no other squares for the queen. So, but even after he finds the move queen C1, I'm just gonna grab the rook. And the funny thing is, after the knight takes my knight, if he takes my knight, I'm now going to have two pieces attacking f4. So I'm going to take on f4. His queen will still be trapped, which means he has to play rook to d2 and just pinning his own rook. This is now just completely over. So we take the rook. If his knight takes the knight, now we take, and his queen is trapped, and he has to give me the rook. So he decided not to take, but there's now nothing guarding the knight, bro. So now I'm just gonna take the free knight. Like, yeah, he's losing all his material. The pawn on f4 is also hanging, but I'm ahead by 12 points. And naturally, I'm gonna be going for a checkmate now. So instead of just defending the knight, I'm going to play the move queen to b6, putting my queen on the same line as the king. Because if the bishop takes my knight, I'm able to check on c3. If he blocks, well, he's not able to take due to the pin. King has to move, I take. But then if he decides to take this knight, it's the same thing. Now I check on c3 with the d knight. And this is now just a royal fork. The king now has to move out the way. And then once the king moves out the way, we simply grab the queen. And okay, it's now over. Before we take the queen, let's take on f4 with check, because he still has to block with something. If he blocks with the queen, oh, what am I doing? Well, if he blocks with the queen is still pinned. But what I saw was if he blocks with the rook, I still take the queen. He's not able to take due to the pin. So the king has to move. I take the rook, and okay, it's not GG's. Instead of taking, wait, I was about to say instead of taking the rook, I play here, he takes, I check. But let's just take the rook. This is just over. So he took, let's just pull the bishop back. From here, it's just castling the king, getting the pieces in the attack, take all his pieces, win the game. Okay, so he moves the bishop. Let's kick the bishop. Bishop has to move. And he resigns. More Caro Kan against 600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600. We're still playing some Caro Kan defense. Knight to f3 was played. Let's go d5. We're always going to be playing d5. The lower level players, they're always going to be playing the exchange version of the Caro Kan. But as we said, it's just so easy for us to develop our pieces. We start by developing the knight. So one knight out, he moves the pawn, two knights out. Very simple stuff. Now he plays the move bishop to g5. It doesn't really do much. It attacks the knight, but the knight is completely already guarded. So let's just develop our bishop, pinning the opponent's knight to the queen. And then the opponent made their first mistake, which is to giving up their bishop for a knight. Now, this is actually a very interesting position. I'm going to choose to take with the e pawn, so that way it automatically helps me to develop my dark squared bishop. And now he plays bishop to b5. I'm assuming he's going to be giving up his bishop for a knight. That would be a mistake though, but let's see what he does. I'm just going to develop my bishop to e7. The plan is to get my king out the center of the board. He did give up the bishop for the knight. Now I'm just going to take. The bishop is actually more active on d6, but if I had played bishop d6 before, the pawn on d5 wouldn't have been active. We're not going to be like them though. Like whenever they play h3, first of all, we're not going to just take someone's knight if it's not under attack. Second of all, even if we're pinning someone's knight, we're going to pull the bishop back to maintain the pin. Because when they play moves like g4, we pull the bishop back. Their king is all now, well, not their king, but their king side is now exposed, which means if he chooses to castle on the king side, he's going to be getting checkmated. Knight back to e2 was played. I'm assuming he's trying to play knight f4 and attack my bishop. Doesn't really do a lot though, but I don't want his knight going to that f4 square. So castling would be a decent move for me. I'm thinking about just playing bishop to d6, or why not just queen c7? Let's focus on moving new pieces, seeing that we were in the opening stage of the game. Now he decides to play knight h5. I'm thinking about bishop to e4 here to save the rook. Bishop to e4, there's pawn to f3 to attack my bishop, but then I have pawn to f5, counter-attacking his knight on h4 because it's going to be unprotected. I really like that idea. Let's attack his rook on h1. What? The the guy just played pawn c3. That's a rook, bro. That's crazy. Like, come on, guys. You have to make the games be at least a bit more competitive so that way the viewers could learn something. Now he's playing pawn to f3 to trap my bishop. Okay, I was thinking about playing pawn to f5, but now the knight is going to take. But if the knight takes, my bishop is no longer trapped. I don't think I need to try to rush all of that, but he is planning on castling his king. So yeah, let's go with f5. Let's hit the unprotected knight. This is called a discovered attack, by the way. Notice I move the pawn. It looks like something is happening here, but something is actually happening here. Now that he moves the knight, this is called like it's like the drawback principle. If the knight moves away, then my bishop takes on f3. And because I'm ahead by a rook, this is just fine for me. He took a pawn. Let's just move the king, assuming he's going to put the knight back on f5. But no, all my pieces are going to be joining the attack. So he puts the knight on f5. Now, here's what I want you guys to notice. My bishop pins his knight to his queen, and his king is in the center of the board. So now I'm going to play the move rook to e8. Why? I'm putting my rook on the same line as the king, and I'm also trying to apply pressure to his pinned knight. Now, queen to d2 was played, which it's a very nice move. I have to be careful, or else I'm going to be getting checkmated. So, for example, he's threatening to play queen h6, and after king g8, he plays queen g7 mate. But remember, offense is the best defense. So, my first instinct is not how do I defend against that mate. My first instinct is how do I attack his king? So let's say bishop to h4 check. If bishop to h4 check, the knight guards the h4 score, but then the knight no longer guards the g3 score. So now I'm going to be able to play queen to g3 checking his king. This knight is not able to take due to the pin. And then once the king move, I should be able to checkmate his king or win his queen. So bishop to h4 check is a really nice move. And the good thing is, if he moves the king to, well, he instantly took on h4. I was about to say if he moves the king, I'm just gonna take his knight with check, but queen to g3 just ends the game. Because if he puts the king on f1, I take the knight with check. If the king goes to d1, I also take the knight with check. I still need to be careful about this queen h6 move, but He's not going to be able to check my king anyways. So he moves the king to e8. Here's what I'm seeing. This knight is dead. There's nothing you could do to save the knight. And remember what I tell you guys about when a piece is pinned? You don't have to be in a rush to take that pin piece. So why not just get rid of this knight on h4? Now his queen is not able to check our king. His knight, there's nothing he could do to not lose his knight. So I'm also going to be able to take on e2 with my rook, which could also potentially win his queen. He moves the king, but he puts the king and the queen on the same rank, which means once I take the knight, which is what I was planning on doing, now his queen is pinned. So he's not even able to move away the queen. He has to sack the queen. And this is now just completely winning. We're ahead by 11 points. Rook to g1 was played. Now I'm going to play the move queen to f2, attacking the unprotected rook, putting my queen on the same line as his king, which means we're now setting up some checkmates. Rook to c1 was played. Okay, let's go king to g7. We need to bring more pieces in the game. The idea of king to g7 is just to get the rook in the game. He moves the king. Let's get our rook in the game with check. And then once he moves the king, this has to be leading to some checkmates. So first I'm going to play the move bishop to d1 check. Why bishop to d1 is he kind of has to take my bishop. If king to d3, that's just mate. But once he takes, now my rook is on his second rank. And there's nothing he could do to prevent queen to e2 mate. Maybe he could sack his rook, but I'm just going to take the rook and then just mate him on the next move. Actually, he plays rook to c2, but no, that's not a checkmate. I was about to say, but that's just a checkmate. Okay, let's just go with the plan. Let's take the rook, king has to move, and then we just deliver the mate. And that's just a checkmate. With that being said, more Caro Kan defense against 700 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 700. Let's continue with the Caro Kan defense. Before we play d5, I'm expecting a lot of exchange Caro Kan at the lower level, but I wouldn't be surprised if I see knight c3. Let's take on e4. That's how we're going to be punishing this line. I wouldn't say punish, but responding to this line. Once the knight takes on e4, now we play the move knight to f6, and we're simply attacking the opponent's knight. The whole idea is to get them to be moving the knight more than once in the opening. Now we're going to be taking with the e-pawn. Whenever they play moves like queen to e2, this check never works. Like, our whole intention was to put our light squared bishop on e6 anyways. Now he's blocking out his light squared bishop, which means it's gonna be harder for him to complete his development. Bishop to f4 was played, and he's playing very, I think he wants to just get his king out the center of the board very, very quickly. The thing is though, because he moved this queen from e2, from d1 to e2, the d4 pawn is now not guarded, and this is called the drawback principle. And the mistake that he made was he develops the bishop. So now once I take on d4, I'm attacking, well, I win a pawn, I attack the unprotected bishop on f4, and I also attack the unprotected pawn on b2. This is how you're going to be beating plays with the Caro Kan, by the way, because the Caro Kan is a very solid opening. It's not very easy to just beat the Caro Kan in the opening stage of the game, but a lot of persons are going to try to attack you, and you're just going to be developing your pieces and winning the game. I mean, the guy didn't even pay attention. He didn't even try to save his bishop or the pawn. So let's just take the free bishop. Now I could say I'm completely winning here. Like 8 moves into the Caro Kan, and developing the pieces is just very simple for black here. So pawn to g3, he attacks my queen. I mean, I have to move the queen. Queen to b4, there's pawn to c3. So let's just pull the queen back to c7 and then just continue with our development. Like, we're ahead by 4 points here. Let's just finish the opening stage. Bishop is not yet out. Knight is not yet out. King is not yet castled. He castled the king. Let's go bishop to e7. As we said, we're just finishing our development first. Our next move is to castle our king or develop our knight. Anything that makes some progress. Knight d4 applies pressure to the bishop though. And the thing is, he's attacking my bishop on e6 twice. I'm only guarding it once. So here's something that I want you guys to keep in mind. Well, I was about to say bishop takes, but knight f5 is kind of annoying, to be honest. Let's just play queen to e5. We're ahead by 4 points. Let's just get the pieces off the board. Like, especially when you're winning, you really don't want to be complicating the game. The only time where you do not try to trade queens is if the position is equal and you don't really have an advantage, so there's no purpose to trade the queens. But you should also have confidence in your endgame skills. And another reason is if you're attacking someone's king or you're just attacking, you don't really want to be trading when you're attacking. But if you're ahead in material, you always want to be trading the queens off the board. So he plays knight takes e6. Let's go queen takes e6. It's the same thing. If he takes the queen, I'm just going to be taking back. If he doesn't, then that's fine. I'm just going to castle my king. Okay. So not only did he decided not to trade the queens, but he missed the fact that my queen was attacking his pawn on a2, and the pawn on a2 is unprotected. So let's just take the free pawn. My king is still in the center of the board though, so I still need to be a bit careful. For example, the queen and the rook is just pointing towards this file, but there's no entry. Like the bishop covers d8 and d6, the knight covers d7, so there's no way for him to come in. I could always castle on the next move. Okay, now he plays rook to e1. He's trying to prevent me from castling. He's basically saying, if I castle my king, I'm going to be leaving the bishop unprotected, and the rook is going to take the bishop. With that being said, let's just develop the knight, because the rook no longer targets the d7 square. My plan from here is to play moves like knight e5, hit the queen. Checking the king here is also an idea, but once the king moves, the rook is going to be attacking my queen. So I have to know when I'm going to play that move. Queen to e4 was played. Now the guy's like, okay, we pinned the bishop. Let's apply pressure to the pinned bishop. So that's not bad what he's doing. But remember what we said, offense is the best defense. It's very important that we set up our own attacking plans. So I'm just going to go knight e5 here. It looks like a very risky move, but my idea is he's going to want to play moves like pawn to f4, and then if I have to move the knight, he's going to try to checkmate me. But for one, if he plays pawn f4, I'm going to have like one extra move to put my knight on g6 and guard the knight, but I'm actually not going to move the knight if he plays pawn to f4. I'm going to play the move rook to d. No, why would I play rook to d8? I'm just going to castle my king. Now my king is no longer in the center of the board. And the whole idea is he's not able to take the knight, which he did. But the reason why he wasn't able to take the knight is now his king is not able to run to the d file anymore, which means that's just a checkmate. But more Caro Kan against 800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 800. Let's do some more Caro Kan defense. Knight f3, we play pawn to d5. If he takes, we're just going to be taking back and we're fine. You guys are going to be learning exactly how to play against the exchange Caro Kan. And this is what you're going to be seeing a lot at the lower level. They take the pawn, we take back the pawn. So remember, in the exchange Caro Kan, just take the knights out first. After you take the knights out, you're going to take your light squared bishop out, then your dark squared bishop. So pawn d4, one knight out, he develops two knights out. Very, very simple. Now, I want you guys to know why I'm making the moves that I'm making, by the way. I mean, obviously, it's usually best to develop your knights before your bishops because your bishops are more flexible pieces. But the reason why you want to develop your light squared bishop before your dark squared bishop is because if you play a move like pawn to e6, which is kind of theoretical, to be honest, so you're not going to lose the game. But especially at the lower levels, you need to learn about moves like getting your bishops outside of the pawn chain. So once we play the move pawn to e6, our bishop is not going to be locked in. Now, the most aggressive thing that my opponent could do here is to play h3, bishop h5, g4. He decides to castle the king. So let's just finish with our development here. Let's just play pawn to e6, bishop to d6, castle our king. Or if his bishop ever goes to g5, then we're just going to put the bishop on e7 and castle the king. So whenever they play h3, let's just pull the bishop back to h5, maintaining this annoying pin on the queen. And we kind of want them to play pawn to g4, especially if they decided to already castle their king. Because now if they castle their king and still decides to play g4, their whole king side is going to be exposed and they're going to be getting checkmated over there. So the bishop moves to f4. Let's just go bishop to d6. This is also a good way to meet the bishop. If it goes to f4, you go to d6. If it goes to g5, pinning the knight, you go to e7. Once we castle on the next move, the position is just very, very solid. Bishop to g3, I don't like. Usually when you're going to play moves like pulling the bishop back to g3, it's not to expose your king. It's funny though, because I'm actually not going to take the bishop. Because if I take it, kind of give his rook an open file, and the pin is not as annoying anymore. So let's just use the time to get our king out the center of the board and just have a look on this position. A lot of times your bishop is going to be on f5 as well. For example, if you can't play bishop to g4 like someone plays h3, just put your bishop on f5. So have a look on this position. To understand what's happening, I want you guys to understand that, okay, all the minor pieces are now developed. The king is castled. What should we do after? We need to start thinking about our major pieces. We need to start thinking about our rooks and our queen. The c file is usually always going to be open. So if you put one of your pieces on the c file, like your rook, you can't go wrong if you do that. But something that I want you guys to pay attention to is the fact that I'm going to try to use a removing the guard tactic here. I want you to notice this pawn on d4. Like the knight guards the pawn, but I'm attacking the knight. The queen guards the pawn. So I'm thinking, what if I just get rid of the knight? If I decide to take the knight, I'm not necessarily going to win the pawn because he could decide to take with the pawn. If he takes with the pawn, though, then his king is just going to be too exposed. But if he decides to take with the queen, then the queen is no longer going to be guarding the pawn on d4. And once we take on d4, we hit the queen and the bishop. So he took with the queen. Let's take on d4. We're already ahead by a pawn. It's 12 moves in. So ensure that you guys know these ideas. And then once the queen move, we grab the bishop and we're doing fine. So the queen moves to d3, and because bishops are better than knights, we're just gonna get rid of his bishop. We took with the queen, which means the bishop is kinda weaker. So now we're gonna take the bishop, especially since we're ahead by a pawn. It also opens this diagonal pointing towards his king. And in a lot of cases, my knight could get to the e4 square to attack the pawn, especially if I'm able to chase away this knight. So he decides to take. Let's start by playing the move queen to c7. The queen attacks my pawn, so I'm going to guard the pawn, but I'm also attacking his pawn on g3 at the same time. King guards the pawn, not bad. But now what I'm seeing is the king is on the same line as my queen, which means once I play the move pawn h5, I'm threatening to play pawn h4. And pawn h4 would be applying pressure to the pin pawn on g3. And if he plays h4, trying to prevent me from playing h4, he weakens the g4 square, and knight jumping into g4 just wins the game. So he did decide to play pawn to h4. Let's hit him with knight g4. This is called a drawback mistake, by the way. Like whenever someone make a move and they leave something unprotected, you should try to see ways in which you can exploit this. So king to h3 is surprisingly not too bad for him. Like he could put his king on h3 and he's not immediately getting checkmated, but I'm going to be setting up something for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get my queen on this diagonal. If I'm able to get my queen on this diagonal, then I could be setting up some ideas. So pawn to e5, he's going to just take my d pawn. So let's start. No, if I play d4, the queen is able to take on h5. You know what? Let's just go rook to c8. Let's finish getting all our minor pieces in the game. Let's not try to rush to win the game. Like the king just has nowhere to go, by the way. So the moment I'm able to get my queen on the same diagonal as his king, he's not going to be able to escape the discovers. Rook to c1 was played. So I don't know. I put my rook on a file. He puts his rook lining up behind his pawn. So that's usually not good for him. Let's just go rook to d8 here. I'm still trying to play pawn to d4 and attack his knight. I'm still going to try to pay attention to what's happening on a5, which is why I kind of play rook to d8 because I'm also trying to play pawn to e5 without moving my pawn, which means I'm going to play pawn to a6 to neutralize his queen from my half of the board. So he pulls the knight back to e2. Not bad. Not bad. Let's do pawn to a6. Let's attack the queen. The queen is on our half of the board for a while. And then once the queen moves, I'm going to play pawn e5, controlling the center, also preventing his knight from moving forward. Let's play pawn e5. But my whole idea is actually to play queen to d7. As I tell you guys, once I get my queen on the same line as his king, that's how you're going to see when it's game over. So the queen went back to d2. Looks like the queen is trying to head to g5. Let's go queen to d7. We're still going to put the queen on the same line as the king because now we're threatening moves like knight t3. That would be a very nice discovered attack on his rook. So he did decide to play the move. So because the queen is on the same line as the opponent's rook, All we need to do is move the knight out the way. And once we move the knight to e3, it actually comes with a check. So the queen is not able to take the knight. Now he has to move the king or block the check. But we're just going to take the rook on the next move. And then once we take the rook, his rook is going to be forced to take. And, we're just going to be winning. So he moves the king. Let's grab the rook. He decides to take with his rook. But no, the rook doesn't guard the c pawn anymore. So now my rook is able to take his c pawn. His knight is under attack. He could try to take on h5 because it guards the knight, but I'm probably going to play pawn g6 to attack his queen. Queen takes d4 was a good try, but that's actually lose the game even faster because now this is called a skewer. I want you guys to now notice how the queen and the knight is on the same line, especially since my rook is already attacking this knight. All I need to play here is rook to e8 and attack the queen. The queen now has to move away. And the reason why it's called a skewer is because the more valuable piece has to move out the way and it's going to expose the lower valuable piece. Once the queen moves, we grab the knight. We have two pieces attacking his g2 pawn, and that will conclude the game. He moves the queen to f5, but again, it's making it easier for me because we're trying to trade. So first we're going to trade, then take on d2. And there's no way for him to guard the pawn on g2, so I'm just going to take that pawn. So he took on h5. Let's take on g2 with check. And now I'm trying to set up a checkmate. But here's what I'm seeing. If I check on h2, the king runs to g4. So I'm going to play g6, trying to set up a mating net. Basically, once the rook move, I'm going to try to protect the g4 score by playing pawn to f5, which means my next move is going to be rook to h2. And that's going to be a checkmate. He checks the king, but that doesn't matter. I'm just going to move. I'm still threatening a mate. He moves the pawn out the way. Now, if I check, the king moves. And then if I check, the king moves again. With that being said, it's just a checkmate. More Caro Kan against 900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 900. Let's go, Caro Kan. D4, we play D5, always play D5. And against knight C3, we're going to be taking on E4. Because once the knight takes, we play the move knight F6. Remember, we're not afraid of their alien gambit stuff. And if they take on F6, we just play E takes F6. Now, this variation is called the Tartakower variation of the Caro Kan. It's very simple how you're going to be developing your pieces and gaining an attack on the opponent's king. Bishop to d3, unfortunately, though, is a mistake because it puts the bishop in front of the queen, which was guarding the pawn. So now I'm just going to take a free pawn. I mean, he's able to play knight f3 and claim that he gets some attack in return, but a pawn is just a pawn at the end of the day. Now I'm going to go queen to g4, attacking his unprotected pawn. And there's actually some very cool ideas that could happen from this position. So he castles the king, and I need to get castled and I need to finish my development. So let's start by playing bishop to e6. Whenever he plays h3, I'm just going to play queen h5, and then I'm just going to finish my development. So he puts the rook on the same line as my bishop. Need to be careful, but just a bit careful. Let's finish the development. This is usually how we're going to be developing our pieces, not necessarily with the queen on g4, though. This is just because he gave us a free pawn. So think about the same situation, but with the queen on like d7 and the bishop goes to d6, we castle. But now that he plays h3, I'm going to pull the queen back to h5. Eventually, I'm trying to sacrifice on h3, but I'm not going to rush it. Like, if I'm able to castle my king and put my rook on the same line as his queen, then that could set it up and make it a bit easier for me. Okay, he plays knight to h2. He's trying to just start trading all the pieces off the board. But that's kind of crazy because he's the one who's down by a pawn. I'm going to be trading because when you're trading, you're supposed to want to, when you're winning, you're supposed to want to trade. Now I'm going to get my king out the center of the board. And from here, I want to develop my last piece, maybe bishop c5. He plays bishop c4. Let's go bishop c5, developing the bishop. And once I play something like rook to e8, every single piece is now going to be in the game. And this is how you usually win. Once you get all your pieces in the game, it's like tactics are going to start presenting themselves in the position. And things like this will also happen. People are just going to be blundering, but you have to put your pieces on active scores. For example, he moves his king to h1. Maybe he's putting his bishop on the same line as my king, but the king was the only defender of f2. So now I'm just going to take on f2 and I'm ahead by 2 pawns, just like that. And remember what the overall plan is. It's to trade the pieces off the board. Not the pawns though, the pieces. Rook to d2 attacks the bishop. Let's just pull the bishop back to b6. That's fine. I'm thinking of moves like knight c5 to attack his bishop. And I don't mind if he gives me the bishop here. That would be an additional advantage to the extra 2 pawn that I have. So rook to d1, we're still going to play knight c5. And again, remember, we want to trade. We're ahead in material. We want to get pieces off the board. On to b6. Okay, let's start trading. Let's get rid of the bishop. If he takes with the rook, we get rid of the rook. Okay, let's just trade the rooks. And once he takes with the rook, we swing the other rook on the file to just trade the pieces off the board. That's what you do when you're ahead in material. Like some persons don't trade because they're only ahead by 1 pawn. But the moment you're ahead by anything, you start trading people, start trading pieces off, and then bring them in the end game. Because in the end game, it becomes easy to win because the plan becomes to promote the pawns and attack the pawns. So he trade. Let's play king takes. Another thing that we need to ensure that we do is just get our king as active as possible, as quickly as possible. Once we're in the end game, I'm thinking of bishop c7, knight f3. Okay, let's get the king as active as we can. King to h2 allows bishop c7. Again, now I'm forcing the bishops off the board. Notice I didn't play bishop to c7 from before because it didn't force the trade. Now I force the trade. And again, I'm ahead by 2 pawns. Once I'm able to, now I'm just improving my king, but once I'm able to get the knights off the board, it's going to be over. And I don't have to get the knight off the board to win. I'm not going to be attacking his pawns and pushing my pawns up the board. So he's improving the activity of his king. Let's also improve the activity of our king. A3 is not a bad move because he's trying to prevent my king from entering. I'm thinking about playing pawn to g5 to check his king. Yeah, let's go pawn to g5 to check his king. There's actually a trick here. If he puts the king on e4, I'm able to check, take the knight, and it's just going to be winning because I'm ahead by 2 pawns, which is what he did. Now we play bishop to e4. This is like the exact complete reason why I'm telling you guys to trade when you're winning, not just ahead by a piece, but ahead by a pawn, because this is now just completely winning. He moves, we just take without thinking about it. And now I'm going to play king to d4. I'm either going to attack his pawns or go and protect my pawns, but it all depends on who's going to queen first. So there's actually another very cool counting idea here, but he's trying to guard the pawn. Let's go king c3, attack the pawn. And something that you guys need to know in the end game is the principle of two weaknesses. For example, now his king is tied down to guarding this pawn. That's when I'm going to be pushing my candidate pawn. Candidate pawn is basically the pawn that has no pawns in front of it, because that's usually the pawn that helps you to get a pass pawn. Simple pawn majority, 4 pawns versus 2, which means I have the potential of getting 2 pass pawns once the pawn trades off each other. He moves the king. Let's play f5. The plan is to play g4. And then once he takes, I play f3, queen my pawn, win the game. He moves the king. Let's keep pushing. Now, once he takes, f3 is the next move, and I'm going to be 2 moves away from queening, especially since his king is on in the corner. He's also going to be getting mate. He resigns, but more Caro Kan against 1,000 rated players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,000. Let's play some more Caro Kan defense. Pawn d4, we play pawn to d5, and then knight d2. This is like the classical way to play against the Caro Kan. If they go knight c3 or knight d2, it's the same thing. We're just going to take on e4. Their knight has to take on e4. And then we're going to play knight to f6 to attack the opponent's knight. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the opponent to be moving the same pieces more than once in the opening stage of the game. And it's going to give us very quick development. Taking on f6, now we're going to be taking with the e pawn, not the g pawn, even though we're trying to take towards the center, because once we take with the e pawn, it allows our bishop to get very easy development. This is called the Tartakowa variation of the Caro Kan defense. Knight f3, these are going to be the main type of moves that you see. And the setup that I'm going to be showing you as black is you're always going to be playing it. Your bishop always goes to d6. Like, that's usually the best square for the bishop. Bishop to e2, the opponent is trying to develop. Let's just get our king out the center of the board. And this rook is going to go to e8 so that way it has access to the open file. And another reason why we're moving the rook from f8 to e8, it's to facilitate the knight on b8 to maneuver to the f8 square. So we're going to play moves like knight e7, knight f8. The opponent plays pawn to c4, which that's a good move, by the way. But let's continue with the plan. Let's go knight e7. We're trying to ensure that we finish our development first and stay solid. Like we want the opponent to overexert their position. For example, anytime you see a move like pawn to c5, you should be happy. He's weakening the d5 square, and his d4 pawn becomes a backward pawn. Let's just pull the bishop back. Pawn to d4 here blunders the c pawn, so that's not really good. And we're just going to continue with our plan. Knight f8, bishop goes to e6, queen goes to d7, and then we set up all the aggressive stuff on their king side. Bishop to e3, very normal move. Let's go knight to f8, finishing our maneuver. And the purpose of this knight on f8 is to guard the h7 square so that way you don't have to worry about any type of checkmate. And the knight could also enter the game via g6 to h4, especially once we start this attack on the opponent's king. So the knight went back to d2. Not sure why he played that move. I mean, it's one less piece guarding the h2 pawn. So that's something. Let's just develop our bishop though. Usually the bishop goes to e6, by the way. But because there's nothing on this diagonal, that's why I choose to put the bishop on f5. So if you're playing your game, bishop to e6 followed by queen to d7 is perfectly playable. You could also think about moves like bishop to e6 followed by bishop to d5. Queen to b3 was played. He is attacking my b7 pawn, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to play the move queen to d7, and it indirectly defend my b7 pawn. The queen is now not able to take on b7 because of this discovered attack, and I'm just going to be winning his queen. This is not hope chess, by the way. Like I'm trying to ensure that I develop my pieces as quickly as possible. And when the opponent attacks you, your first instinct should not be to react to their attacking move, even though sometimes you need to defend against it. So if you notice me playing queen to d7, I didn't really react to the move, but I indirectly defended against it. Now knight c4 was played, and what you should do once the opponent make a move is just try to see or ask yourself, what are the forward moves that they could make? How could they move their pieces forward? And the knight doesn't really have a lot of moves forward. If knight e6, I'm just going to take, I'm attacking the square twice. So let's just go rook to d8. Now, all my pieces are in the game. Rook to d8. Well, he's also trying to get his rook in the game. Now, even though all my pieces are in the game, I'm still going to be following a principle called the principle of the least active piece. So, which piece do I have that's not really doing much? And this is how you should be thinking, especially if you don't see an immediate way to land a tactic. Just find a piece that is not really doing much and put it on a better square. What's my plan? My plan is to target the focal points around the opponent's king. And these are basically the pawns and the squares that are only being guarded by the king. So f2 right now is not necessarily a target because it's being guarded by the rook as well. These are the pawns that I'm trying to target. And that's how you attack someone's king. Bishop to f3 was played. That's a slight inaccuracy, by the way, because I'm not sure what he saw. Maybe he thinks I'm trying to get my bishop here. He's trying to defend his position by guarding g2. But now I'm able to play knight h4. It's an attacking move. I put a piece on his half of the board. It attacks the bishop. If he does not move the bishop, I'm just going to take the bishop and double up his pawns. If he moves the bishop, then he's wasting time. I think he needs to find a way to protect the bishop, like maybe with the knight or moving this bishop so that way the queen guards it. Who knows? It's funny because he puts the bishop on f3 just to pull it back to e2. That's basically what it looks like to be wasting time when you're playing. So because we're trying to target these pawns and these squares around the king, there's some moves that I'm considering, like sacrificing my knight. And if the king takes bishop check and the king moves, But that doesn't really give me a lot because then once I take the rook, it's just a rook, and I'm gonna lose two pieces. Bishop to h3, I like. I think that's the move. Because now if the pawn takes, queen takes h3, and the g2 square becomes the target, and the h2 square, and there's nothing you could do to guard them both. So bishop to h3 is actually probably a great or even a brilliant move. Now, how do I find these types of moves? Just remember that if you want to find the best moves in the opponent's half of the board, look for ways to put pieces on the opponent's half of the board. But to even narrow it down some more, if after all your pieces are developed and everything, and you're trying to look for ways to start your attack, just focus your energy on the pawns in front of the king, but preferably the pawns that are only being guarded by the king. Because your goal is to get them to weaken their king, get them to move these pawns. Because the more they move these pawns, the weaker their king becomes. Queen to d3 was played. I think he's just trying to bring pieces over to the defense, but he didn't try to defend g2. I have two pieces attacking g2. He only has the king, which means once I take on g2, this is just complete winning, by the way. Bishop takes g2, it attacks the rook. I'm also not assuming that he's going to move the rook because, I mean, he did move the rook, but we already conquered the g2 square. My bishop is also pointing towards his h2 square. So now I'm going to hit him with the move queen to h3. And now everything is just under attack. I mean, knight f3 check is an idea. Bishop takes h2 is an idea. Queen takes h2 is an idea. Well, she pulls the knight back to d2, which it didn't really defend anything. I mean, queen takes h2 is a checkmate, but that's also checkmate. More Caro Kan against 1100 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. More Caro Kan it is. Before we play d5, which version will we see? Okay, knight c3. This is one of the classical ways to do it. Let's take on e4. And once they take back on e4, we go knight to f6. Knight g5 is the alien gambit. Most players play knight takes f6 here. We are seeing the alien gambit here. I'm sure I was going to see it, but let's play pawn to h6. It's very important that you guys know how to beat the alien gambit. It's not something that I want you guys to be running away from because the opponent is sacrificing their knight on the sixth move, and black has a better position. It's just a case where if you don't know what you're doing, then you're going to be in trouble. But as I mentioned in the intro, the winning move in the alien gambit is c5. Once you know the idea of, okay, knight to f3, threatens knight d5, we're still going to be playing c5. And now the goal is just to target their d4 pawn. If they check us on c4, we're going to block the check by playing pawn to e6 or bishop on c8. You could say it's a bad bishop, but it's doing a good defensive role, protecting the pawn. And then once the knight checks you on e5, you're always going to pull your king back to g8. There's a lot of ideas where a knight goes to g6 and you don't move away your rook. Because even if they take your rook and you take the knight, black is still going to be better because black already win a knight. So black is going to have two knights for the rook. Notice how we now have two pieces targeting their d4 pawn. He now only has one piece protecting the d4 pawn. Knight c6 is coming to target the knight on e5 and also target the d4 pawn. So remember, once we start trading the pieces off the board, we're just going to win the game. So the knight g6 move that we spoke of was played. Remember, when the knight goes to g6, no need to try to protect the rook. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take on d4. That's another pawn. I'm ahead by 3 points, by the way. So he's about to win 2 points. So I'm still going to be ahead in material. So he took the rook. Let's take back. I'm now ahead by 1 point. It's very simple development from here. My king is also castled, by the way. So it's just knight c6, pawn e5. I have very good control over the center. And the two minor pieces will beat the rook any day. So he pulls the bishop back to d3, which is bad, by the way. You don't want to be finding yourself moving the same pieces over and over in the opening. I'm now going to play the move pawn to e5 because pawn to e5 threatens to play pawn to e4 and just harass the bishop again. It also opens this diagonal for my light squared bishop. Knight c6 is still coming. Bishop to b4 is also a possibility here. The goal is just to get all the pieces out as quickly as possible, especially if he doesn't castle his king. If he doesn't castle his king, then that's more problems on him. So bishop to d2 was played. Let's go pawn e4. Like, we're forcing him to move the same pieces more than once, so it's fine if we're also doing it. But after he plays bishop to c4, to continue my development, I'm going to play the move queen to c7. Notice how it's a development move, but it still attacks his bishop. These are the types of moves that you should try to look for. It gives you what is called the initiative. And once you have the initiative, the opponent is now forced to be reactive to your moves. Now, another thing that I'm seeing is this move, pawn to e3, which is it's not an easy move to find. I mean, bishop to g4 is also a very nice move. But what I'm looking on is the fact that he plays b3 to guard his bishop, his rook could be in some danger. So if I'm able to play e3, hits the bishop, takes, hit the bishop again, and then he takes, I'm thinking queen e4 to hit the unprotected bishop. And if he protects it with the queen, he could lose the bishop. And protecting it with the king is just bad. So let's go for that idea. It doesn't mean that it has to work, by the way, because after takes, he could also just play the move bishop to c3. And then once he plays bishop c3, my knight on f6 is in some danger. But he did decide to take, which means we set up a very nice idea. Queen to e5. This is called a pin. And his queen is basically overworked on d1. It's like, okay, I want to guard the bishop, but I'm already guarding the rook. If I use my king to guard it, then bishop to g4 wins the queen. If I use the king to go here, then knight g4 is a check, which means this is not just completely losing. Maybe he needs to just castle and be like, okay, I'm going to lose a piece anyways. Might as well just put my king to safety. And then I'd simply take the free piece, develop the rest of my pieces. But he blocked with the queen. And this is a drawback mistake because we already know what the drawback principle is. The queen was guarding the rook. He guards the bishop, but no longer guards the rook. So now we just take the rook with check, and we're now just ahead by an entire rook. The funny thing is, if he moves the king, he's about to lose more material. If he blocks with the bishop, then I win the bishop. So he's down by an entire rook, but he's still forced to trade the queens off the board. So he blocks with the queen. Let's trade the queens. And again, the goal is to develop, but if you're able to develop with tempo, do it. Bishop to g4. And when I say develop with tempo, it basically means you develop and attack something at the same time. He moves the king. No, I'm not able to do that. So let's just go knight c6. All my pieces are now out. Rook to d1 is coming. Yes, my bishop is under attack. But why move the bishop when we're able to swing the rook in the game with check? And now he still has to be careful because if he blocks with the bishop, we're ahead in material. We're trying to trade. He moves the king out the way. Not bad. Let's just move our bishop out the way as well. And then after rook to f1, I'm going to set up a trap here. I'm going to play the move knight e4, just completely leaving the bishop unprotected. It's just a trap, like it improves the knight, but there's nothing deeper than the fact that the rook is actually covering the d1 square. So if he decides to take my bishop, I'm going to be able to check him on a3. The king is not able to move over because my rook guards the square, so his king has to go to b1. And then rook to d8 is going to be a check. His bishop has to block, and rook takes e1 is going to be a mate. It's like it's not one of those traps that low rated players set up where if the opponent doesn't fall for it, then all of a sudden now they lose the game. But the opponent did fall for it, so let's give a check on a3. The king now has to move. We check on d1. King has no squares, so the bishop has to block. And that's just a checkmate. More Caro Kan against 1200 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1200. Let's play some Caro Kan. D4, we play D5. And against the exchange version of the Caro Kan, he's playing the pan of attack though. Let's go knight f6. Remember, whenever they play this, we may have to play moves like pawn to e6, but we're still going to develop the two knights to c6 regardless. So knight f3, we're going to play pawn to e6 to guard the pawn. And once they take, I like to take with the knight. And even though it makes sense to take so my bishop gets active, I'm going to be playing it very strategically. Now he's going to have an isolated pawn on d5. Again, if I take with the knight, it allows my bishop to be developed, but I'm still going to take with the queen because he's left with an iso pawn. Bishop to e2 was played. I'm thinking of bishop to b4 check, but he's just gonna block and then play queen takes. So let's just play b6 here, followed by bishop to b7, putting my bishop on this long diagonal. It also good was bishop to d6 followed by castling. Probably was a bit better, but once I follow regular development protocol, I should be fine. I'm expecting him to play something like pawn b3, trying to get his bishop to c4. I'm thinking about moves like bishop e7, rook to d8, bishop f6, and apply a lot of pressure to his isolated d4 pawn. Pawn to a3, maybe he's trying to prevent one of my pieces from going to b4, but I had no intentions of putting a piece there. Let's continue with the plan. Let's finish our development. Let's get our king out the center of the board. Bishop f6 applies pressure to d4. I may just go bishop f6 and take on d4, by the way, because I want you guys to notice that his knight on f3 is kind of pinned to a checkmate on g2. So he plays bishop e3, and I'm assuming rook c8, bishop c4 is coming. If bishop f6, knight takes, bishop takes, still doesn't work. So let me just get my king out the center of the board. The plan from here is bishop f6 still, rook to d8, and again, anything that points towards this d4 pawn. Rook to c1 was played. That's a very good move. Let's go rook to d8, putting my rook on the same line as his queen. I'm expecting bishop c4. I'm going to find somewhere safe to put my queen and then continue to apply pressure to his iso pawn. It's usually around this side these types of players starts to blunder. And the moment I said it, it's crazy. The moment I said it, the guy blundered. That's the thing with these types of players. Like, you guys literally need to just only know what development is, develop your pieces, and then just not blunder while you're doing it. Because people in the middle game, they just think they have to do something. The reason why this is a blunder is because my queen and my bishop is on the same diagonal pointing towards g2. So once I take the knight on e5, I'm automatically threatening a checkmate on g2, which means he's not able to take my knight due to the mate. He has to put something on f3. And then once he puts that thing on f3, it gives me enough time to move my knight to safety. 14 moves in the Caro Kan. Guy's already down by a piece. He donated that piece. So f3 was played. I'm thinking of playing knight g4 because if he takes, it's still mate. But, oh, knight g4 hits the bishop. If bishop d2, then d4 is hanging. So let's go with knight to g4. It's the same idea. He's not able to take my knight due to the mate on g2. Maybe he thinks bishop c4 helps, but I'm just going to take. Wait, but if I take, yeah, wait, did I blunder? If I take his bishop, he takes my queen. I take his queen, he takes my bishop. I attack his bishop. Oh, I didn't blunder. Let's just take his bishop. Because now I'm attacking his queen. If he takes my queen, I take his queen. And then once he takes my bishop, I attack his bishop, which means if he takes my knight, I take his bishop. If he moves away his bishop, I move away my knight. If he protects his bishop and attack my bishop, I attack his rook, which would be forcing him to move away, and I'll take his bishop. Had to see all of this, though. Had to see all of this. So he took my knight, I take his bishop, and from here I'm just ahead by a full piece. So rook c1, that's a free pawn, so let's just take it. Maybe he thinks my back rank is weak, but I'm just going to be blocking the check with the bishop or the rook. It doesn't really matter. My plan, though, is to get both of my rooks on a second rank. If I could get both of my rooks on a second rank, then it's just going to be a winning advantage. So he plays rook to c8. Let's play pawn g6. Maybe he's trying to apply a lot of pressure to my pin bishop. So okay, he pulls his rook back. Then I'm going to go bishop c5, putting my bishop on the same line as his king. So if he doesn't want any drama, I was about to say pawn b4 doesn't work due to rook takes b4. But the thing is, if I play rook takes b4 with check, he sack his rook. And then I take his rook, he takes my rook, I takes. Oh, but that's actually completely winning. This is called converting, sacrificing in order to give yourself a simpler position. If I takes, checking his king, he takes my bishop, I take his rook, he takes my, well, he resigns. Why did he resign? More Caro Kan against 1,300 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,300. More Caro Kan defense coming your way. Knight c3, we're still going to be playing pawn to d5. And if they take, we're just going to be taking back. So our opponent is deciding to play the exchange version of the Caro Kan, which is what we should have the most knowledge in so far. Again, how do we play against this? Step one, get the knights out. So knight f6, one knight out. He checks. The plan was to develop the bishop, the knight anyways. And then from here, we're going to be developing our bishops. It's usually recommended to first develop the f5 bishop before moving the pawn to e6. So that way we don't have any bad pieces. But because the knight is not on f3 and we're not able to pin, I'm going to play the move bishop to f5. The plan from here is to play, okay, queen to f3 was played. It's not just a free pawn though. Okay, it's actually not just a free pawn. It's a bit tricky. If I take the pawn, my knight guards d5, so he's going to take on d5, and then he's going to have two pieces attacking d5. With that being said, let's just play pawn to e6. Let's continue with our development. And from here, I'm just going to go bishop e7, castle the king. I think my opponent is trying to just castle his king and start some attack on my king side, but let's see. I want you guys to also notice how the d4 pawn is left unprotected. I'm just not able to take due to the pin on my knight. But one thing I see a lot of Caro Kan players do, they play a6 trying to neutralize this bishop. You don't have to play a6. Like, once you get your king out the center of the board, they're usually gonna take on c6 anyways. But if you're gonna play a6, ensure that you get out of this pin first. So h3 was played, and what my opponent is seeing is if he castle, my bishop goes to g4, and that's a skew up. But let's just develop. We successfully completed the development of all our minor pieces. Pawn to g4 was played, very aggressive, by the way. Let's pull the bishop back to g6, and once I castle my king, I could start some attack on his king. So he decides to castle on the queen side. I'm going to choose to castle on the king side. This is going to be a very dangerous game, by the way, because he already has two pawns pointing towards my king. But the guy, come on, bro. Like, come on. Just don't be giving up your bishops for knights, bro. Now I'm just gonna take your d4 pawn. Why couldn't you have just developed the knight to e2? Why did you think you had to give me the bishop before you develop your knight? That's weird. But what am I gonna do? I'm gonna hit him with, let's think. I wanna go a6. But let's go rook to c8. You guys know why I like to play moves like rook to c8. Like, I'm already putting my rook on the same line as his king. So he has to be careful. And remember how I teach you guys how to attack. It's what are the pawns and the squares that is only being guarded by the opponent's king? He decides to play pawn to h4, which first it looks aggressive, but then you notice that I have a queen and a bishop covering the h4 square. So now I'm able to simply take on h4, and that's a free pawn. It's still slightly dangerous because the rook is now on the same line as my king. Well, not the same line, it's on the same side. Like, my king is fine. But my bishop on g6 just guards the important squares. So I'm never going to be getting attacked. Rook to h2. Yeah, I know exactly what this guy's playing for. He's trying to double up the rooks on the h file, tap my bishop. But again, once my bishop moves, you're still not going to be able to take on h7 because the bishop guards h7. So I'm going to go knight to b4. This is how you attack someone's king. You attack the pawns and the squares that are only being guarded by the king. You see how quickly he plays pawn to a3? I mean, that's just a free pawn. It's risky though, I'm not gonna lie, because if I take on c2, the knight is trapped. Like, I'm gonna play knight to a2 check instead. Like, knight to a2 check is actually so dangerous. Because if I go knight a2 check and then the king takes, is c2 pawn is now exposed. Rook takes c2 check. He has to move the king. He's going to put the king on the same line as my bishop, which means once I pull my rook back to c3, it's a discovered attack on his queen, and I'm going to be winning his queen. So let's just play knight a2 check. No, I'm not, this is not me playing hope chess. I'm not assuming that the guy's going to take my knight, but that's just why he's not able to take my knight. He has to now move his king, and then once he moves the king, I'm now going to simply trade on c3. I have to trade on c3, assuming the knight is going to take, and now I'm going to continue with some attack. I'm ahead by a pawn though, so I'm not trying to do too much. Bishop to d3, I don't think I want to force him to play bishop to d3, because if he manages to, or if he knows that all he needs to do is get rid of this bishop in order for all of those attacks to work, then that's going to be good. So with that being said, I'm trying to figure out where I should put this bishop though. That's the thing. If I go bishop to f6 or bishop to e7. Let's start with bishop f6. Let's apply some pressure to his d pawn. He immediately played bishop to d3. Guy knows exactly what he's doing. All right, now I want to take on d. I think I may have to take, by the way, or maybe just start with queen to d6. So that way, if he takes, I take his rook. Queen d6, if he takes, I takes. No, queen d6, he has rook h1. Okay, I think I have to take. I have to take his bishop. And then once he takes with the queen, he's threatening a checkmate. And I'm going to play pawn to h6. I need to be careful. I'm ahead by a pawn, so I'm chilling, but I need to be careful. The guy just played pawn to f4. He wants to play pawn to g5. And then if I take on g5, then queen h7 is going to be mate. Okay, what do I do here? Okay, I'm going to trick him. Sorry, bro. But I'm gonna play queen c7. I'm attacking the pawn, but I'm also putting my queen on the same line as his unprotected rook. So if he still plays pawn g5, I would have took, but he decides to pull the knight back to e2. Okay, I'm under attack. Let's start getting queen c. He's not gonna trade queens. But if he doesn't trade queens, c2 is hanging. Yeah, let's go queen c4. Like, he's about to attack me. I'm not trying to get attacked. Like, if pawn to g5, we just get the queens off the board. Rook takes, pawn takes, rook h3, pawn g6, and I'm not getting checkmated. So he traded the queens. That's what I want. Let's just go rook takes, pawn c3. And as a Caro Kan player, you need to know the minority attack, especially when there's a pawn on c3 and a3. Your goal, your whole entire goal from here is to get a pawn on b4. I think he wants to play pawn to g5, especially rook to h1 followed by pawn to g5. So I need to be a bit careful about what I'm doing. What I may do is once he plays pawn g5, I'm going to pull the bishop back. And then once he takes on h6, I'm going to play pawn to g6. And he gets back the pawn, but at least he doesn't get the aggressive attack. Let's go pawn to b5. Yeah, this guy's very aggressive, I'm not going to lie. But I'm ahead by a pawn, so I'm chilling. This is Caro Kan. So he decides to move the rook. Let's play pawn to a5. And the whole idea is, okay, he plays b3, which is also fine. Let's just move the rook first. Doesn't really matter where I put the rook, so let's just go rook c6. And then once he plays pawn g5, I have to move the bishop. If I take the pawn, I am mated. So let's pull the bishop back to e7, attack the unprotected pawn. Once he takes, we do not take. If we take this pawn, we're mated. So I'm going to play g6, which means his rooks are now just pointing towards his own pawn, so I have nothing that I'm worried about. He could try to check, but once I move my king, I'm just safe. So he check. Yeah, let's just play king to h8 here. He needs to guard this pawn, and my whole idea is to counterattack. King c2 didn't guard the pawn. If I take, however, yeah, let's just grab the pawn. Now I'm ahead by a pawn again. We're not afraid of his rooks, by the way. It's pointing towards his own pawn. He moves the knight, but the knight has no good forward moves. Like, I'm sure he's trying to find a mate, but there's no mate here, bro. So now I'm going to hit him with rook c8. That's two pieces on his weak pawn on c3. And we know what to do in the endgame. We attack the opponent's weak pawn. It's funny because he may have to just pull the knight back to e2, which is what he did. I'm thinking of bishop b4 to apply pressure to the pinned pawn, but there's rook to a3. So that being said, I'm going to play... Hmm. Well, if I play pawn to b4, there's rook to a1 though, and that's kind of weird. Bishop to b4, rook to a3. Okay, let's pull the bishop back first. Let's pull the bishop back to d6, putting it on the same line as his rook, which means pawn g5. Could say we're applying some pressure to that pawn. I want to play b4 and apply pressure to the pawn, but I don't want my bishop to be trapped. Rook to a1 attacks my pawn. This guy knows something. He knows a thing or two about chess. He knows a thing or two about chess. Pawn push takes pawn push. Bishop to b4. I'm actually thinking of just playing bishop b4. But let's just play rook to, let's just guard the pawn actually. Like, I'm gonna just play a4 and create a pass pawn and win the game like this. This is a very strong 1300 guy though, I'm not gonna lie. So he moves the king. Now we're gonna play pawn to a4. We're advancing our pawn majority. This is not just a pass pawn, by the way. He plays pawn to b3, and I like the idea. Okay, let's put the what to do? What to do? Let's put the rook back on c8. Let's target his c3 pawn. There's a lot of tricks in the position. For example, if I take on f4 and the knight takes, rook c3 check, and then the king has to go back, then rook check, and then I take the rook. That's actually a very nice trick. The guy's seeing everything. That's crazy. Pawn g5, too risky though. G5 he moves. Check knight takes, check king takes. Okay, yeah, it's g5. Let's play g5. It's very risky. He's not able to take due to this spin. But once I take and the knight takes, the whole idea is the c3 pawn is no longer guarded. So I'm probably going to take with the bishop. Nah, if I take with the bishop, knight takes, rook takes, knight block. And I only have 2 minutes on the clock. So he moves the rook. This pawn is now unprotected. Not trying to take that pawn though. So now we take with check. He takes with the knight, that I take this pawn. If he moves the king, I just wouldn't expect. I wasn't expecting that. But let's see. Let's see. Maybe he need. It, guy move the king. Takes, check. Okay, now I need to be careful. I could be getting checkmated if I'm not careful. So if I take here, that's just mate. Holy shoes, what's happening? Push, takes. Push, takes. Rook over. Okay, let's try e5. This is kind of weird. This is kind of weird. Rook to g1. I play e4. So he takes, I takes. I'm trying to get my king into the defense, and I'm also attacking this pawn. If rook to g1, if he checks here, I have king takes h7. I'm not gonna take, obviously. So he did do it. Maybe suck, king up, push the pass pawn, maybe. Push the pass pawn. If he checks, I take. Okay, let's just push the pass pawn. That's actually a trick. Like, he should not check. If he checks and think he's winning, then I'm just gonna. He thinks he won the game because then I know he's probably celebrating now. But no, I just take. Obviously, if he trades the rook, he's losing. There's nothing he could do here because this is hanging. I have a pass pawn. If he pulls the rook back trying to checkmate me, I could block with the rook. So I'm not. I'm not gonna lie though. Guy played very well, but good try. Now I'm just gonna move my king, bro. If he takes with check, I just take. And then once the king takes, I should be able to take this pawn. I'm ahead by 3 pawns, and he's now just checking the king. You don't really want to check the king in the end game. But I only have 45 seconds on the clock, but that's more than enough time to win the game. So he puts his rook behind my pawn. Um, Let's move the king out the way. I need to start pushing my pass pawn up the board. He checks, let's move. And then once he does this, I'm going to start pushing my pass pawn, getting the king in the game. Remember that patience is very important in the end game. He attacks the pawn. Let's just push the pass pawn. I'm assuming he's going to attack my rook, but then I'm going to play rook to b3, and then I'm going to be completely safe. So let's play rook b3. Plan is to push the pass pawn, maybe rook to b2, maybe push this up the board. Still not as easy as it looks, but that's a bad move. Let's play king d5, get the king in the game. Now I'm trying to use my king to take the pawn. So he moves the king, but it allows me to push my pawn. Check doesn't help, bro. King c3, and now it's just over. Because the moment he tries to prevent me from queening, rook to b1, and I'm just going to have a queen on the board. Guy played well, though. I'm not going to lie. He moves the rook. Let's just promote. Guess he's trying to get a few checks in, but I mean, 19 seconds is just too much time. Like, he's not going to be able to get anything. Let's just give some checks. Now we're just walking his king over to the other side. Now we give another check, and then the next move is going to be a mate. Whoops, that's not mate. But once I check here, the king has to move, and that's just a checkmate. More Caro Kan against 1,400 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,400. Let's continue with the Caro Kan defense. Before we play d5, and now we're seeing an advanced variation of the Caro Kan. Against this, just play pawn to c5. And just keep in mind that against the advanced version of the Caro Kan, we're usually going to be targeting their d4 pawn. And because we're going to be targeting their d4 pawn, whenever the knight goes to f3, we want to play bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen, because the knight on f3 will be one of the main defenders of d4. So pawn to c3 was played. Now I'm going to play knight c6, applying more pressure to d4. Bishop to f4 was played. Now I'm going to take on d4. Just so that way we could see that the d4 pawn is weak. And then one cool idea that I like to try is to take the knight, because usually whenever we take the knight here, he has to take with the pawn, because if he takes with the queen, it leaves this unprotected. Another very cool way to apply pressure to d4 is queen to b6. And I think I prefer queen b6, because with queen b6, we're also targeting their b2 pawn as well, especially if the bishop decides to move from c1. It's also not doing anything on f4. So now he has to think about, how am I going to prevent the threat of him taking my knight, then taking my pawn, and not losing my b2 pawn at the same time. He could try queen to b3, but if he plays queen to b3, there's nothing that's going to be guarding d4. So I'm just going to be winning a pawn. He needs to simply develop his knight. And if I take this pawn, he takes this pawn and threaten a fork on c7. So after knight c3, I had to play e6 there, and then maybe he tries knight a4. But will he find it? or he's going to be reacting to the fact that I'm attacking b2 and then play something coward like b3. Okay, he pulls the bishop back to e3, which means the b2 pawn is now just hanging. This is not it's not like one of those pawns where you're just up a clean pawn. For example, if I take on b2, he moves the knight, he's immediately threatening rook to b1. So with that being said, let's not rush. Let's go pawn to e6 and let's try to do the plan of just apply as much pressure to his d4 pawn. The threat is still better than the execution, so he's still gonna have to play a move that tries to defend b2, and moving the pawn to b3 significantly weakens his dark squares. Now I'm able to play the move bishop to b4 check, and my knight is going to be able to get to e7 very, very easily. Or bishop c3, rook c1, bishop b3, rook c2, and I have nothing. So let's go knight to e7. The plan is to play knight f5, and again, target the d4 pawn with everything you have. Bishop c3 also targets d4. My plan is to go knight f5, get rid of this knight, put the bishop on c3, and then I'm going to have everything threatening d4. So bishop to e2 was played. If I take, c goes bishop takes. If knight f5, castle takes, c goes knight takes. I don't want him to play knight takes. So first I'm going to take on f3. So that way the knight is not able to take and his bishop is the only piece that has to take. Once that happens, I already now have two pieces attacking d4 and he only has his bishop on e3 protecting it. So once he takes, now I'm going to take on d4, and we successfully targeted and won the d4 pawn. My knight is pinned to my queen, but the moment I take this bishop on f3, it's going to come with a check, which means I'm going to have enough time to just move my queen out of the way. Or I could also just play knight to f5, which guards my knight, and it also attacks his bishop. So I'm also perfectly safe if I play knight to f5 here. Pawn to a3, probably trade because I'm ahead by a pawn, just get all the pieces off the board, but slightly scared to start trading and opening up rooks with my king in the center. So rook to e1 was played. If I take the knight, the bishop takes. I take his bishop, the queen takes. That doesn't give me anything. I take the bishop, the queen takes. I take this bishop. The, wait, wait. If I take this bishop with check and he decides to take with the queen, what is guarding this knight? Especially if I take the bishop next. That's a removing the guard tactic. Let's take on f3 with check. This is very interesting. My queen is under attack, but that's a check. Once he plays queen takes, that's when I'm going to take on e3. And there's nothing going to be guarding his knight on d2, which will be pinned to the rook. So let's take on e3. If he takes with the pawn, he loses the knight. If he takes with the rook, he loses the knight. If he takes with the queen trying to guard the knight, I first trade the queen, then he loses the knight, which means he's just losing a knight. So he decides to take with the pawn. Now we take the unprotected knight. His rook is also under attack. I'm assuming he's going to play rook to f1, trying to attack me on f7, but I'm ahead by 4 points. I want to trade pieces off the board. So now I'm going to play the move queen takes e3, which comes with check. Now once his queen takes and I check his king and his king has to move, and then I just castle my king or even play king e7, there's nothing he could do to win this game or even draw. Okay, he decides to move the king, but we're still going to trade. And once he takes back, I'll castle my king. I was about to say I'm not going to castle because I need my king to be active, but I don't need to do all of that to win this game. Now I just need to put both of my rooks on the c file because that's the only file on the board. Rook f1, he's attacking f7 twice. I'm guarding f7 twice, so let's take control over the file. Rook c1 also forces him to trade one more piece off the board. So let's go rook c1, and this is now just completely winning. Once you're ahead in material, just start trading the pieces off the board, forcing the pieces off the board. He moves the king. Let's grab the rook. And now we put our rook on c8 again, the only open file on the board. And being a Caro Kan player, usually the c file is going to be more than likely always open. He attacks my bishop. Let's just pull it back, counter-attacking his pawn on e5. Rook to c2 completely loses the game because he puts his rook on the same line as my rook. So once I play bishop takes e5, it comes with check. So now he has to react to the check. Then I'm going to take his rook. And then it's really GG's. He moves the pawn. Let's grab the rook. And okay, once he moves the king from here, it's just pushing the pawn up the board and finishing our checkmate. which is why he resigns. But more Caro Kan against 1,500 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,500. Let's play some Caro Kan. Bishop to c4 is usually never the move. This is called the hillbilly attack, by the way, but it's not good because the moment we play d5, and obviously we're going to be playing d5, regardless of what they play, we're forcing him to break chess principles. Like once we take back, he's gonna be forced to move the same piece more than once in the opening. And all it does is gives us time. So we're still gonna be developing the pieces the same way how we play the exchange variation of the Karakan. And he already moved this bishop more than once. But let's just keep developing. It doesn't mean the advantage is so big, we're just gonna use it to win the game. So he decides to castle. Let's develop the bishop. It's usually good if we're able to pin the knight because whenever they attack our bishop, we do not take the knight. We pull the bishop back so that we maintain the pin. Unless your opponent plays like this. So this is kind of weird because we're pinning the knight, obviously. The bishop is on b3, missing. Whenever we're pinning a piece, we definitely want to apply pressure to the pin piece. I'm afraid of the fact that after knight d4, he's able to check my king. But once he checks the king, let's say I block with the knight on d7, not really a move I want to play. Knight takes d5, he wins a pawn. But then I take on f3, checks the king, he has to take, hit him with bishop h3, hit the rook, and then once the rook move, I hit him with e6, which hits the knight, threaten queen to g5, checkmate, and it's something. So I'm going to be down by a pawn. He's at risk of getting checkmated, and his king is weak. On the other hand, my king is also going to be in the center of the board, but let's see. And remember, guys, I want you guys to be learning stuff from the video. So whenever I go through those long visualization, ensure that you're able to visualize it as well, because it may not happen on the board. So at least try to pause the video and try to see everything that I said. So bishop to b5 did happen. Knight to d7 is the only move. And then if he takes on d5, that's how we're gonna takes bishop here, hits the rook, and if the rook move e6, starting queen g5, because the pawn hasn't moved as yet, so the bishop doesn't cover the g5 square. Well, he did play knight takes d5, so let's do it. Let's take on f. I'm also looking on playing e6 first, but I don't think it helps. Like knight back, and I mean he's still going to be able to block the check with the knight. But let's go with the whole variation that we looked on. Knight takes f3 is a check. He has to take bishop h3 hits the rook. Now, any move that he had played that doesn't move the rook, then it would have been a surprise. But now pawn e6 threatens the knight and threatens a checkmate in two. He should not move the knight, by the way. He's not forced to move the knight. I mean, he needs to move the d pawn so that way the bishop covers the g5 square, which he did. He plays pawn to d3. Now, I'm thinking about playing something like moving my queen, but unfortunately, I'm going to be leaving c7 unprotected. So I have to be a bit smart about what's happening. I am down by a pawn, but I don't hate my position. I mean, we have to develop though. So let's go bishop to d6. Bishop to d6 also protects c7 in case I'm trying to go queen to h4. I was thinking about bishop c5 though, but pawn d4 hits the bishop. Once I castle, it's just going to be a normal game, but his king is going to be weak. So that's the whole point. I'm trying to checkmate the king now, which I don't think I have to do, but the king is weak. So we're going to be looking on some forcing moves that we could play. That's a nice move. That's a very nice. That's a bad move actually. Terrible move. That's a terrible move because what he's trying to do is he's just trying to trade. But remember one thing I told you guys about tactics. When it comes to finding tactics, you have to be able to spot weaknesses. What are weaknesses? The fact that his king looks like this is already a weakness. Another thing that causes weaknesses in a position is unprotected pieces. Maybe now he doesn't have any unprotected pieces, but the whole algorithm to find the best move in chess comes with looking on the check first. So queen to g5 check. That's my whole idea. The check obviously doesn't work because of the same bishop that we spoke about. Whenever the check doesn't work, we look on the captures. Bishop takes f4 is a capture. And then now once his knight takes, his knight becomes an unprotected piece. And because there's more than one weaknesses, the fact that the king is exposed, the knight is unprotected, we're able to hit him with queen to g5. Same idea. Now he has to move the king. I mean, if he blocks with the knight, that's just mate. So once he moves the king, we're just going to take on f4. And 14 moves into the Caro Kan, we're already completely winning. So he moves the king. We grab the knight, hit the unprotected bishop. I'm assuming he's gonna take on d7 and said, okay, bro, like you're ahead by a piece, but your king is in the center of the board, which is true. But this is not hard to defend because his king is also not safe. So if he tries to move away his queen anywhere, f3 is going to be left unprotected. Rook to g1 was played. Looks like he's trying to attack this pawn. I don't think I'm too interested in protecting that pawn. Like, I'm more interested in bringing all my pieces in the game. So let's go with rook to c8 here, putting my rook on the file. I'm thinking about some rook c5, rook f3, or even rook h5 ideas. If he decides that he wants to take a pawn on g7, this is going to be bad for him because he's going to be opening additional lines pointing towards his king. And then I'm going to hit him with rook g1 and he's going to be in trouble. So he didn't take it, but I also have a very nice idea. Very nice idea here. Like, I want you guys to, again, I don't want to just teach you guys the Caro Kan. I want to teach you guys chess. It's like you're playing your games. It's your turn to move. What do you think about? The first thing you do is you look on the opponent's last move, see where their pieces are pointing, coming into your half of the board. Like his pieces coming into my half of the board doesn't do anything. So you have to do the same thing with your pieces, which is why the best in how you find the best move is look for moves that you can put on the opponent's half of the board, put pieces on his half of the board. And that's why you look on your checks, your captures, and the threats first. So queen takes f3 is a check, and then once the rook block, that's mate. But the fact that his queen is on e2, this doesn't work. And that's how we're going to be using a tactic called removing the guard. Rook takes e2, still a forcing move because the check didn't work. We had to look on the capture. Now we're hitting the queen. If he decides to take, now he gets checkmated in two moves, which means he's not able to take the rook. He has to move his queen, and then I'm just completely winning at that point. Rook to g4 doesn't help at all because all I'm going to do is just take the rook. The queen is still under attack. The funny thing is, he thinks this makes it a trade. Like I take his rook, he takes my rook. But he's actually going to be getting checkmated here. Now, I'm thinking about it. Do I play bishop takes check, king over, queen g4 check, king over, check, king over, check, king up? Nah, that just gets me back the rook. With that being said, why not queen takes f3 check? And then after king over, we go bishop h3. Now the king is not able to run, and there's nothing he could do to protect the g2 square. The only downside of this is it's going to be his turn to move, which means he's going to have the option of checking or king. So we have to calculate that as well. So check, king over, bishop h3. He checks our king, and now we have to escape all the checks. So let's say king e7. He checks the king again, and then we run to e8. And then he checks the king again. We run to f8. He checks the king again. Okay, this is tricky, but I know that it works. I'm not seeing it, but I know that it works. There's no way a queen by itself should be able to find a perpetual check. So check, I run. I can also block the check, but I'm trying to mate the guy, so I'm not going to try to trade the queens. So I'm assuming I should run my king to f or g6. Like, if a king is on g6, the only queen check that he's going to have is queen e4, which trades the queen off the board, but I'm just completely winning. So he checks here, run to e8, he checks, run to f8, he checks, run to g8, that's mate. So we can't run to g8. Okay, that's a nice check. That's a nice check. I'm thinking about g5 though. G5 check and then f7 makes it way easier for me because now my king is able to run and hide behind the pawns. So let's go g5. Okay, now he checks on b4. He didn't even take. It's the same thing. Now I'm able to hide behind. Actually, now I'm able to go to e8 because if he checks, I go to f8, and if he checks, I go to g7. No, but then he checks here. So let's go to f6. The good thing is, if he checks and I move, he's not able to take the rook due to mate. So he has to ensure that he keeps on checking. He's gonna run out of checks. He's gonna be forced to trade the queens off the board, which is just gonna be a complete win for me. So here's the actual variation. Is it king g6 or pawn e5? If pawn e5, he checks here. King f5, he checks here. King g6, he checks here. King h5, he has no checks. Let's try that. So pawn there's immediate king g6, by the way. But remember, if king g6, there's queen e4, still winning for us, but trying to see if I'm able to escape the checks. This is actually a good skill to have. It's going to happen a lot in your games. So king f5, he checks here. King g6, he checks again. Pawn f6 evades the checks. So let's go king f5. So this is the only check that he has. Then we go to g6. The queen is now under attack. Now, the only check that he has is d6. And once he checks on d6, king h5 or pawn to f6 just evades the check. So let's go pawn to f6. And once we play pawn to f6, he's going to either resign, sack the queen, but mate will be the next move. He sacked the queen, so we're just going to take the queen, and that's going to be a checkmate. With that being said, more Caro Kan against 1600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1600. Let's play some more Caro Kan defense. D4, we play D5, regular stuff. We're going to be seeing either exchange, advance, or just classical Caro Kan. He plays the advanced variation of the Caro Kan. Against this, we're going to be playing pawn to c5, just immediately striking back at the opponent's center. Now, pawn c3, from here, I'm just going to go knight c6. And what you guys need to keep in mind is, in the advanced version of the Caro Kan, the goal is to apply as much pressure as possible to this d4 pawn. Notice how the opponent just plays the move knight f3, and that's why we didn't play pawn e6 and block out our bishop, because now we're able to play the move bishop to g4, pinning the opponent's knight to the queen. And a strategic reasoning why a move like bishop to g4 is good is because the whole idea is to target the d4 pawn. So in a lot of cases, we're going to be giving up our bishop for a knight, winning the pawn on d4. Now, bishop to d3 makes it a bit. Okay, I was about to say it makes it a bit easier, but it actually didn't. So bishop to d3, we're still going to be taking on d4. And there's a little trap here. For example, I was thinking about taking on d4 and ensure that you guys don't fall for this because I thought I was winning. So knight takes d4, there's queen to a5 check, which checks the king and it hits the knight. And if I try to pull the knight back, I'm going to lose my bishop. Still doesn't mean I'm not winning though. All I'm going to do is just get rid of the knight. The moment I take the knight, I take one of the main pieces that is defending the pawn on d4. And he doesn't necessarily have to lose the pawn. Like he could take with the pawn and then double up his pawns. And then when I take on d4, he takes on h7 and then also give up his bishop for a knight. So he's not going to be down by a pawn. But if he doesn't do all of that, then I'm just going to be playing with an extra pawn. So he did decide to take the queen. With that being said, we're just going to take on d4 and attack the opponent's queen. I want you guys to notice that my development is not complete. So I need to ensure that I finish my development as quickly as possible. He pulls the queen back to d1, which means the queen is on the same line as the knight. I'm thinking of playing pawn to e6. The bishop takes h7 idea would be a possibility at that point. So let me just pull my knight back to c6. I'm also attacking the pawn on e5, but I honestly have no intention of trying to win more material. I'm trying to get my development out the way. So he plays knight c3. He's attacking my pawn. Let's just play e6. Just add some defense, allows my bishop to be developed. Notice how he's not trying to protect the pawn because he's already down by a pawn. He's probably saying, okay, I'm just going to sacrifice the pawn to get some attack on my opponent's king. With that being said, I need to finish my development as quickly as possible. Once the guy plays a bishop move and a queen move, his development will be completed and his rooks will be castled. So I need to ensure that I'm very quick with my development. So let's start by going bishop to c5. I want to go knight to e7 next move and then just get my king out the center. So he plays rook to e1. He's now guarding his pawn on e5. I like the idea of playing queen to h5, but it's kind of like hope chess. The guy's just going to play pawn to g3. So let's just continue with knight e7. Remember, the goal is to get developed as quickly as possible. Queen to g4, I'm not going to lie, would have attacked g7. So he plays bishop f4, so you could say his development is completed. He definitely has some compensation for this, though. Now what I'm going to do is get my king out the center of the board. It's so risky, though. If I castle, queen h5, pawn g6, maybe knight g6, pawn h6 first. Or let's not castle and play rook to c8. Let's do that first. Let's delay the castle. Sometimes when you play openings like the French and the advanced variation of the Caro Kan, even though you're going to be castling on the king side, you kind of delay it a bit. So that way you can see how the opponent is trying to attack. Now, rook to b1 was a weird move. I mean, rook to c1 would have made a lot more sense. Knight to b4, I'm thinking of to just immediately attack the bishop. I'm also thinking of knight g6 to attack his bishop. Like knight g6, he pulls the bishop back and then I castle. That seems to be very safe for me. But let's play one more waiting move, pawn to a6. I'm thinking about playing the move knight b4 hits the bishop, and I don't want to play knight b4 and allow him to play bishop b5. Also, the move queen to g4 is very strong, and he's going to have a lot of pieces pointing towards my king. Now that he plays queen to a4, he's just misplacing his queen. Like, it would actually be way better for white to have the queen pointing towards my king side, because now I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board. And in order for him to get any real attack, he now has to transfer his queen over to the king side, which is going to take him some time. And remember, I'm ahead by a pawn here. So I'm willing to start trading pieces off the board and simplify the game. At the end of the day, we are playing the Caro Kan defense. Pawn to a3. No, he plays pawn to a3, trying to prevent knight b4. Pawn to b4 is also a possibility. I'm thinking of just going queen to b6. Yeah, we're definitely going to be playing queen to b6. What queen to b6 does, it creates a battery on the f2 pawn. If you notice, I have two pieces attacking f2. He only has the king guarding f2. And this is something that we spoke about a lot when it comes to attacking the king, attack the pawns and the squares around the king. Now he pulls the bishop back to e3, which that's a bit suspicious because the opponent has two pawns that is adjacent, two pieces, two minor pieces that is adjacent to each other. So it allows me to play a move like pawn to d4, forking both the bishop and the knight. Like I'm trying to see if the guy is trying to trick me, but there's no tricks. The guy just fell for a fork, which is crazy at the 600 level. But again, this is the Caro Kan. People are going to try to attack you, but you just play solid, keep the solid position. They're going to sacrifice, take the piece that they sack, trade the pieces off the board, win the game. He moves the knight to e4. Let's just take the free piece. I mean, knight f6 sets up some attack. I need to think. Like, if I was playing with the white pieces, I would play knight to f6 because I didn't even think about it. But knight f6, pawn takes f6, queen to g4 check, king to h8, pawn takes f7. He threatens mate on g7 and attack my knight. Um, at that point, rook to g8 attacks the queen. And then once he moves the queen, I play knight g6. I save the knight and I guard h7. So that's the defense. Ooh, he went for it. I'm going to be confident because I already calculated it. Let's take on f6. He took back on f6. He didn't even play it correctly because now my pawn is on e3. And again, two pieces adjacent to each other. Taking on f2, that's just a pawn fork. Now, everything is still going to happen, but it looks like he just lost a rook in the process. So he moves the king, we grab the rook, and then after the rook takes, we're going to play knight to g6. Knight to g6. So it cuts off the bishop from coming into the attack. And then we just need to ensure that our g7 square is guarded. So let's grab the rook. He takes back. We're now ahead by 11 points. So we literally just need to not lose the game right now and we'll be fine. For example, I'm thinking of playing the move queen to a4, hits the queen, hits the rook. And then if he trades, it's just completely winning. There is moves like queen to e4 though. So let me just move the knight. Yeah, there's nothing that I should be afraid of here. If a queen gets to h6, it's mate though. I need to keep that in mind. So that being said, okay, the guy's again making it way easier than it needs to be for me because he's the one who's down by 11 points and he's trading pieces off the board. Take with the h pawn seems to be very risky. Queen to h4, however, I'm just going to take on b2, and that's a free pawn. And then if he plays queen to h6, I take on f6. So it looks dangerous. If I take with the f pawn, that's also winning. I mean, rook takes, I should be able to play rook to e8, and then once I trade the pieces off the board, then it's just winning. Yeah, let's actually go with the less risky one, seeing that way my time is very low. If he takes on e6, I just hit him with rook to e8. The more pieces that is traded off the board, the easier it is going to get. Queen e4 attacks my pawn on e6, knight d4 guards the pawn. So he plays queen to f4, guards the pawn. Queen is also probably heading to h6, but none of that should be too threatening. I mean, guy's just losing, to be honest. Let's just go queen to c7 here, attack the queen. Like, once he trades the queen, then it's just going to be over. Queen to h6 doesn't do anything. It just loses the pawn. The guy sack his queen, then he sack his rook, left his back rank undefended. Let's just give a check. The rook now has to block. That's just a checkmate. But more Caro Kan defense against 1,700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,700. Let's go pawn c6, playing some Caro Kan. Now, he's playing the advanced variation of the Caro Kan, so let's play pawn c5 here. And as we said, Our goal is just to apply a lot of pressure to their d4 pawn at this point. So, okay, pawn to f4 is kind of weird because now I'm able to take on d4 and pull out the queen. And we know that you shouldn't be developing the queen early. So once I play a move like knight c6, I'm already doing fine. Now, bishop to b4 is a very good move. It basically prevents me from taking the queen. Usually people play bishop to d7 here and then take back c6, which is fine. But I'm just going to develop normally. Like the move I want to play is e6, but we know that we don't want to block out the bishop. So let's go bishop f5. Queen to a5 check doesn't work, by the way, because check, knight block, sack, takes, check, check. Probably would have worked actually. Check, knight block, sack the queen, he takes, take the queen, he checks, king move, he takes the rook, I check, I take the rook, and I'd probably be ahead by a piece actually. Yeah, that probably would have worked. Yeah, I think I'm playing a bit too fast. But knight c3, let's play the move pawn to e6 now. Like, I'm not going to be able to take the queen. The queen is not hanging. His c2 pawn is hanging, by the way, but I'm not trying to be too greedy. So knight e2 was played. I'm trying to make this move work, but I'm sure it's too late. It's obviously too late. Queen to a5, and he's probably gonna take. So let's play the move. Like I want to play knight e7 followed by knight takes c6. Let's do that. Which means the moment I get rid of the pin with maybe pawn to a6, queen to a5, I'm assuming that he's gonna take. So let's play pawn to a6 now. And then once he takes, my knight takes, and his queen is still under attack. Another thing that I'm noticing is if I'm able to get my bishop on this diagonal, that would be very nice. Okay, so queen to a5 was played. Doesn't do anything at all, by the way. I guess he's just trying to guard his pawn. Let's develop the bishop with the tempo that we spoke about. And then I'm trying to play pawn to b5. It's crazy because his queen seems kind of trapped. It's not trapped, but it's kind of trapped. Let's play pawn to b5 and hit the queen. If he takes, I'm just going to take. Queen takes looks like a fork, but queen to b6 guards everything. So he has to move the queen. Yo, is this guy's queen trapped? I think he has to sack the knight because if he plays queen to b3, knight to a5 traps the queen and I win the queen. So he has to sack the knight, and then I'm just going to play queen to b6 and everything is going to be guarded. He probably has to trade the queens and I'm going to be ahead by a piece. 13 moves into the Caro Kan. So he did sack. Let's just take and play queen to b6, protecting both of my pieces. And he's also forced to trade the queens off the board here. So he traded the queens. Let's just take. My position is very strong, by the way, because not only am I ahead by a piece, my bishop is cutting off his king from running. So I'm thinking about a little attacking plan, and it starts with h5. I want to play either h4, h3, bishop to e4. That could lead to a checkmate. But he plays knight g3. So I'm actually going to go with a different plan, which is knight e7. And you guys are probably wondering, why am I giving up my bishop for the knight? But there's actually a checkmating pattern here. Well, if he had taken, he plays h4 instead. Um, so how do I do this? I don't think I want to give him the bishop anymore because his position is just weak. Like takes knight takes still threatens knight g3 though. But I don't think I want to give him the bishop anymore. I want to play rook h6, rook g6 with my bishop on the e4 square. Bishop d3, he plays rook d1. Bishop here, he plays rook here. Okay, let's start with rook to h6. Like, I want to move my bishop. I'm not really seeing where though. Like, if he takes, I takes with the same idea. But let's do this first and see where the attack comes in. And by the way, I'm not castling my king because we're kind of in the end game, which means king safety or my king safety is not the real issue here. So he plays a4. I guess a5 is coming. Rook to g6 hits the knight. If knight takes, bishop e4 should win the game. And if knight takes, this threat should be very strong. So let's go for this. I really wanted my bishop on e4 though. So he guarded it with the king. That's interesting. I'm able to play this move though. Rook to g4, attacking his unprotected pawn. This is actually threatening a checkmate, by the way, so he has to be careful. Wait, knight takes f5? Well, if knight takes, I have to take back the knight because the knight is going to be guarding his h pawn. But after knight takes, there's no way for him to guard the pawn because even if he tries to play pawn to g3, which he did play pawn to g3, I'm just going to take. Now his rook is under attack. He's not able to play rook to g1 because my bishop covers the square. And the plan is still to take this, after moving my knight. This is a very cool attacking plan that you guys should use when you play against the advanced variation of the Caro Kan. Like the bishop cutting off his king from escaping. Very nice idea. So he moves the rook. Let's just pull the knight back, attacking his unprotected pawn. And then once I grab this pawn, his rook is also going to be under attack. Bishop moves. Let's grab the unprotected pawn, hits the rook. Rook now has to move. I'm not sure where he's gonna put the rook. Like the guy's just losing, to be honest. My rook on a8 isn't really doing much, but it's defending against his pass pawn. I'm ahead by 3 points. The guy's trying to trade pieces off the board. Let's just trade. I'm gonna play knight to f5 though. I'm still gonna allow the trade, but remember to take is a mistake. We want to trade on our terms. Now once he takes, this becomes a pass pawn, and it's easier for my rook to swing over to the h file and attack his king. So for example, pawn b4, king d2, pawn a4, check the king has to move, and that's some attack. I definitely get some attack. So let's play king to d7 here. He has two pass pawns pushing up the board, so I have to be very careful about those. So king to g2 is the only move. And then once he moves the king, my bishop is now under attack, so I have to move. Let's just pull the bishop back. And if he pushes, I push, he push, I check, king up, I check. That's mate. So I push, check, king back. This is weird. Okay, let's go bishop c5 first. I have a plan. I want to play g3, rook h2. I want it to lead to a checkmate. And I have to be very careful because these pass pawns are dangerous. So b6, g3, b7 I check, king back I check. And if king over I push, and if he queens, I queen with mate. That's the plan. So b6 I push. I mean, if he plays rook to h1, I'm just going to trade rooks. I'm just winning. But if he plays b7, then I check. King has to go here, I check. King has to go here, I push. And if he decides to queen, I queen with mate. Maybe he could try promoting to a knight, but he probably doesn't even have, he probably has auto queen on. And if he promotes to the knight, it doesn't matter anyways. So he did push. And I think once I checked, there's actually king here, which I didn't see. I thought this was mate, but it's not mate. Question is, can I set up a checkmate? Like, can I put him in a mating net? For example, let's say I play bishop f2. That's the plan. Just guard my pawn. If bishop f2 guarding my pawn, I could allow him to queen. Because if he queens, oh, that's not mate. I almost blundered. I thought this is mate, but it's not mate. Maybe check king up, check, king up. Okay, I can't mate. That's very unfortunate. So I have to play king to c7 here and just prevent his pawn from queening. I'm still winning here though. Like the pawn is not able to move. If he pushes my bishop back, will just prevent his pass pawns from doing anything. In fact, if he put no, I was about to say, yeah, if he push, I take. And then if he push, I sack. And then after rook takes, I just push my pass pawn. So he pushes. As we said, we take the bishop because I'm going to be sacrificing my bishop. So once he push, we sack. And then once the rook takes, now it's just a matter of queening the pawn. So let's give a check to force his king to move. And then once I play pawn to g2, he has to play rook back. I play rook up, and then I'm just completely winning. And there's no little tricks that he could do to queen his pawn. Like once he moves the pawn, I'm just going to take. So rook has to go back. And then my rook goes to f1. And it's going to be an automatic queen on the board. When the opponent resigns, more Caro Kan against 1800s. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1800. Let's go to Caro Kan. D4, we go D5. And more exchange variation of the Caro Kan. Immediate C4. This is called the pan of attack. It's a bit more similar to what we play in the regular exchange. We're still going to go knight f6 to guard the pawn. But a lot of times, we're actually going to play pawn to e6. So knight c3, let's just go knight c6 first. But I don't really like to get the bishop out when the pawn is on c4 because but let's see, knight f3, bishop g4. I'm trying to remember what I don't like about this. There's something about it that I think it's queen b3. So if I move my bishop, he moves the queen to b3 and then everything is under attack. And that's why I have to play e6. So generally, you don't want to play e6 and block out your bishop. But this is the pan of attack. We definitely get compensation because in some cases, we could take on c4 and then d4 is isolated. Usually, white tries to play pawn to c5 here to prevent our bishop from going to the d6 square. Let's see what he does. Bishop to g5 is a height. He's pinning my knight, and a lot of pressure is being added to d5. So let's just go bishop e7. And the next move is to simply castle the king. We're playing very solid. Bishop e2 was played. Now let's get to our king out the center of the board. And then he got his king out the center of the board. And what I wanted to talk to you guys about was this move. Pawn takes c4. I want you guys to notice how I waited on him to move his bishop to e2 before I took on c4 because I didn't want to find myself moving the same pieces over and over again. So, no, I wanted him to move the same piece over and over again. And my plan from here is to get my knight to the d5 square so that way his pawn on d4 becomes isolated. But I like the idea of playing pawn to a6, which threatens pawn to b5 and attack his bishop. And it also allows my bishop to get to the b7 square. So he plays a3. Let's hit him with b5, attack the bishop. Bishop went back to a2, and the bishop is also pointing towards a pawn chain, so I'm fine. Now I'm going to go bishop to b7. My development is complete. I think he also needs to play pawn to d5. If he plays pawn to d5, it's going to be a bit harder for me to win because he's going to get rid of his only isolated pawn. Like if you have an isolated pawn, try to get rid of it as quickly as possible. My plan from here is to find ways to fix the weakness, but I'm not really seeing a lot of ways to do it. Like I could try knight to d5, but he's just gonna take, and then I'm gonna have a nicer pawn. Queen to d2 was played though, so let's go knight a5. Putting the knight on a5, the knight is guarded. Eventually, if I'm able to get a rook on c8, I could play knight c4, but I'm just trying to protect the d5 square with as many pieces as I can. Immediate knight to e5 was played. Looks like he's trying to either protect c6, prevent me from going to c5. It's not a bad move though, to be honest. Rook to c8 makes a lot of sense. Pawn to h6 makes a lot of sense. Knight e4 is okay. Okay, I'm going to start with pawn to h6. I mean, there's just too many pieces on our half of the board now. Plus, the bishop is still pointing towards our half, especially since it's on the same line as our king. We have to be careful. I'm really not expecting him to sack. If he sack, it's going to surprise me. But if he sack, I takes, queen takes, knight h7, and I should be fine. I mean, if he sack the knight, I just take. I'm fine. I'm not scared. So he pulls the bishop back. I wasn't expecting him to give up that bishop. Now I'm going to play rook to c8. I need all my pieces to be doing something in the game. Knight takes f7 is a very interesting sacrifice that I didn't look on. But he plays rook c1, and now I'm going to play knight d5. I need to just finally fix that weak pawn. So knight d5, if he takes, bishop takes, or not, nah, probably should have played knight d5 from before. Knight d5, knight takes, bishop takes, he takes, and then takes. And then I'm also going to have an isolated pawn. There's also pawn to b4. Yeah, pawn to b4 does something. It attacks the knight. If he takes, my bishop takes, his knight on c3 is pinned. It's fine. The move I want to play, though, is knight to d5. But once my bishop pins the knight, knight d5 or even knight e4 becomes easier to play. So he voluntarily decided to move the knight. Now things are getting suspicious. First of all, I like the idea of pawn to b5 because it hits the bishop. I'm basically just telling him that his bishop needs a better diagonal though. Unless queen to d5 does something, but it doesn't. Pawn f3 and he's fine. I could take the pawn and said, hey, I'm gonna be winning a pawn. Knight e4 I really like. Knight e4 hits the queen. The queen moves to d3. I don't really have much once the queen moves to d3. If I takes, he's gonna play rook takes, forcing me to play bishop takes. And then once he takes, I take. It's a free pawn, but it's a very suspicious pawn. How do I do this? Let's just play knight to d5. Let's finally put the knight on d5. Let's hit the bishop. Let's fix the pawn. I'm not going to be able to play f6 because of knight g6, but I'm just trying to be patient about the whole situation. He took on c8. That's not a bad move. I'm going to take with the bishop. He's still going to play rook c1, but I'm still going to put my bishop back on b7 anyways. If I had taken with the queen, he still would have attacked my queen. I also need to play quickly. So he puts the bishop on the diagonal. Now I have to be very, very careful. I'm assuming he wants to sacrifice on h6 with a lot of threats. So I'm going to get rid of this bishop. Once I get rid of this bishop, there's no sacrifices that's happening. But I gave the guy's rook an open file. That's still a free pawn. But I don't think, I think I need to play way more active than that. That's the thing. Oh, but now he's threatening to take on b4. So I have to take the pawn. Let's just take the pawn. But once he takes, then I may play bishop to b7. I need to focus on my piece activity rather than grabbing pawns. Yeah, eventually he may still have to ensure that he defend the pawn. So let's go bishop b7, apply some pressure to g2, queen d5 in some cases, but I'm expecting him to defend the pawn. I don't want that pawn, or not yet. It's not the right time to take that pawn. So queen to c2, I was expecting that move. He's threatening a checkmate. The funny thing is, if I play g6, he sacked the knight, and I'm actually mated. With that being said, I have to play f5. And then once I play f5, the knight gets access to g6. Oh, well, bishop to e6. Surprisingly, that's not as dangerous as it looks. Because now I'm going to play bishop d5. If he takes, I play queen takes, and then I'm safe. The a3 pawn still needs to be guarded, but it's not time to take that pawn just yet. Knight to f4. That's a very nice move. Because if I take, he's going to take, and then he has two attackers. He already has two pieces attacking my pawn. So I need to add an additional defender. All right, this is actually getting very dangerous. Let's go queen to c8. What I'm trying to do is I'm basically trying to trade the pieces off the board. Like I'm under attack, so I'm just trying to trade. All he needs to do, by the way, is take my rook, then take on d5, then take on f5, and he's going to be ahead by a pawn. So there's something that I did wrong. But his pawn on a3 will always be okay. So he took, let's take, bishop check. I have to move the king now. My pawn on f5 is also hanging. My knight is on the edge of the board. This is not going how I expected it to. And I only have 3 minutes on the clock. So he took another pawn. Let's take on a3. I'm now down by a pawn, but it's a pass pawn. It's also opposite colored bishops. I mean, anything could happen. Anything could happen. Okay, so the bishop is now on the same line as my king. Now I have to be even more careful. And if I play king h8, there's knight g6 because my knight is unprotected. So I'm going to play king to g8. Still plays knight g6. Now, the threat is my knight on a5. I need to not lose this knight. So I have to put it somewhere. All right, let's go knight c5. Let's hit this pawn. If he checks, there's king up, hit the knight. Oh my lord. Oh my god. He thought this was just a fork the whole time. He missed that my bishop was there. Oh my lord. That's crazy. Well, this is the Caro Kan, bro. So he checks. Let's just move the king. I'm fine. If he wants to trade, that's on him. I'm the one who is ahead by a piece. Okay, so he took. Let's take back. Not seeing what the idea is though. He attacks my bishop, but I'm just gonna move and attack his rook. I'm also not gonna give him my pawn. Because if I trade the pawn, it's gonna be harder. This is gonna be the pawn that is gonna allow me to win the game. So first I'm gonna play, well, it's actually a bit slightly dangerous. But let's guard the pawn. We have to guard the pawn. He got his king in the game. I need to get my king in the game. And we both need to play very quickly here. I'm going to play bishop to d8, by the way. Force his rook to move and then push my pass pawn. Probably should have done that from before, but bishop d8, there's rook d5. So let me just continue to get my king in the game. Let's continue to get the king in the game. Then I'm going to go bishop to d8. So h4 was played. Now we're going to continue with our endgame plan, which is to push the pass pawn. So now we're basically forcing the rook out the way. And once he moves the rook, we push the pawn. If he checks the king, just move first, then push the pawn. He moves the rook, but pass pawns must be pushed. And I'm going to now use my king to force his rook away. He also doesn't have a lot of time on the clock. Let me continue to get my... Actually, let's check. Now he has to ensure that he doesn't lose this pawn. But if I take the pawn, I lose my pawn. He pulled his king back anyways. Let's get the king in the game. That was the plan. So he moves the pawn, which is the correct plan. Now, oh boy, let's give a check here. Grab the pawn. The time is running out. Oh, but he moves the king. Let's grab this pawn. The bishop guards it. The king has to go here. And I'm trying to set up a checkmate. If king here, that's not mate due to this. So let's play king e7. But then he has pawn h5. Pawn to e5 was played. Still not mate. He's able to move the king. Let's check. Grab the pawn. He hits the bishop. Let's just move. If he moves this pawn, he loses the rook. And I'm going to continue to push my other pass pawns up the board. So it's just over. He moves the king. Let's roll the pass pawn. Okay, that doesn't do anything. Let's continue to roll the pass pawn. That's not going to allow a check or anything. He moves the king, but we're still rolling the pawns. Check. We move, then roll the pawns. But he lost on time. More Caro Kan against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. Let's play some more Caro Kan defense. So knight c3, again, it doesn't matter what they play on the second move. We're always going to be playing pawn to d5. And then once he plays pawn to d4, it basically transposes into the normal line that we know. The knight takes on e4, we play knight to f6, and he could try knight g5 and go for the alien gambit, but you guys should know how to beat the alien gambit by now. Knight back to g3 is actually not good. It's actually best for them to take on f6, because now, like, anytime when you see a knight on g3, you want to play moves like pawn to h5. It seems as if I'm wasting time, but my whole idea is to play h4. And she's going to be forced to be moving the same pieces more than once in the opening. Bishop to c4 was played. Guy doesn't care. It targets f7, but the bishop by itself is not going to harm me. So now let's play pawn to h4. Let's force the knight to move. I'm assuming he's going to pull the knight back to e2, and I'm thinking bishop to g4 here. I like bishop to g4 because not only does it pin the knight, if he plays pawn to f3, then it's basically taking away the square from his g1 knight. And if he plays pawn to h3, I'm still going to pull back to h5, and I'm still pinning the knight on e2, which means from here it's just normal development. Pawn c3 was played. Let's just go pawn e6, knight d7, bishop to d6. That's the whole plan. Bishop to g5, that's very interesting. Bishop g5 is interesting because it targets my pawn on h4, and my h4 pawn is actually a weak pawn. But I have a little idea though. If he takes my pawn, I want to be able to take his knight. So let's say I play knight d7. He takes the pawn, I take the knight. He takes the knight, we take the queen. Nah, that's not gonna work. Hmm. Let's go queen to a5. Queen to a5 actually attacks his bishop. It's a sneaky move. Maybe he doesn't even see that it attacks his bishop. But I'm actually getting my queen off the diagonal. I don't want him to take my pawn, and then when I take the knight, he takes, and my queen is under attack. So if he decides to take the pawn now, I'm going to take his knight, and he's going to lose his bishop. He could decide to take on f6 and double up my pawns, but it's not worth giving up a bishop for the knight. He did do it though, so let's just take back. So I could now say I have double pawns, but I could also say I have the bishop here. If he plays knight to f3 trying to develop his knight, I'm going to give up my bishop for the knight as well and double up his pawns. The good thing is his pawns are going to be double isolated pawns. My pawns are still connected. Queen to b3 is a nice move. That's a very nice move. It immediately targets my b7 pawn. I'm thinking about just playing knight d7 though. And if he takes on b7, I go rook to b8. And if he takes on c6, I take on b2. But that's too risky. There's queen c8 in the end. Yeah, let's just go queen back to c7. The queen already did its job on a5, preventing the knight from going here. I'm not afraid of any sacrifices on e6, by the way, because once the queen takes, I'm going to check, and I'm going to go knight d. Whoops, I'm going to go knight d7, and my plan is to castle on the queen side, not the king side. One more thing to keep in mind is, so he pulls the bishop back to d3, which really didn't do anything. It just didn't do anything. What I wanted to say was, I mean, the guy could at least try to castle his king on the queen side because it's going to be hard for him to castle on the king side. But now once I hit him with bishop h6, now it's going to be hard for him to castle on the queen side and the king side. All I need to do to castle is to play knight d7 and just castle on the queen side. If this happens, my plan is going to be to start opening the center, especially the g file. I'm going to try to get one of my rooks on the g file and attack this unprotected pawn. Bishop to e4 was played. Okay, I was about to say, what is this guy doing? But his plan is to finally either develop his knight or pull the bishop back to f3. So that way, once I take, he develops his knight. But let's not react to that just yet. Let's just go knight d7. My plan is just to castle. Let's just give him time to solve his own issue. I think he needs to play knight to f3. But then if knight f3, I have pawn to f5. If he pulls the bishop back to f3, we're not going to take. Because remember, to take is a mistake, and we're only going to trade if it improves our position. If I take the bishop, I'm just helping the guy's knight to be developed. So I'm going to pull my bishop back to g6. Now his bishop is not able to get to e4, and he still needs to solve the problem of his underdeveloped knight on g8, g1. So he pulls the queen back to d1. What does that do? Not seeing it. Let's get the king out the center of the board. The guy's king is in the center, by the way, so we know what to do. Once your opponent's king is in the center and your king is out the center, we're now going to start opening the center. So he decides to play knight c1. That's how he tries to solve his problem. The question is, how do I open the center as quickly as I can so that way his king does not castle? Pawn e5, knight e2, pawn e4, bishop f5, pawn f5, bishop h5, and the bishop is trapped and I win the game. So let's hit him with pawn to e5. With that being said, pawn to e5 prevents his knight from going to e2. If he takes on d4, knight takes d4, his queen is immediately under attack. And as we said, that king will not be leaving the center. You see, it's kind of weird. Like, why would you? Let's just say, okay, fine, you're gonna lose the bishop, bro. But why wouldn't you at least try to finish your development? No, all I need to do is just trap the bishop. The bishop doesn't have a lot of squares. So now I'm gonna go pawn to e4. The bishop is not able to go here because of my bishop. And if the bishop goes to g4, pawn to f5 simply traps the bishop, and we're winning the game. So he decides to just give up the bishop. So let's just take the bishop, attack the pawn on g2, pawn f3 hits the bishop. And now I'm just going to move my bishop out the way. Does it matter where I put the bishop? Not really. Let's pull it back to f5 though. I don't want him to be able to tap my bishop again. And I'm trying to get my rook on h8 on this file, pointing towards his king. So queen to a4 was played. Only thing that I'm seeing that it's doing is attacking this pawn. But do I even need to defend that pawn though? The guy's king is just too weak. Let's say I play rook to e8, he takes the pawn. Then I play queen to g6. He moves the king. Then I play queen, bishop to d3. He checks, I block. And that's just a checkmating attack on his king. Let's go for that. Let's go rook to e8. The rook is on the same line as the king, by the way, which means the knight on e2 is now pinned. And that's why queen to g3 becomes a possibility. The guy's still also not able to get castled, and he's not able to develop his knight. So he took the pawn. Let's continue with the plan. Queen to g3 checks the king. The king has to move, by the way. The knight is pinned. I'm assuming he's going to play king f1 to guard the pawn on g2. So once the king goes to f1, well, king didn't go to f1. He decided to go to d1, which means that's just a free pawn. The knight literally has no legal squares, which means he's going to lose his rook. And we're not afraid of a little check. If he checks, I block with the knight. He has no more checks. So he checks. Let's just block with the knight. The rook is still dead. And the opponent resigns. More Caro Kan against 2,000 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 2,000. Let's finish off with a bang. Before we play d5, what will we see? We see knight c3. Against this, we're just going to take on e4. He quickly takes on e4. And then we play knight f6. So taking on f6 is the main idea. We need to take the pawn. And we kind of want them to develop their knight to f3. By the way, the theoretical way for this is actually pawn c3, which is hard to see because now it's going to be actually very easy for us to plan. All we need to do is get our king out the center of the board. And we also need to ensure that we get the knight on b8 to f8. So how we do this is first we put the rook on the file, which is bringing more pieces in the game. Pawn c3 was played. Now we play knight d7. Usually we want to get our knight over to f8 before we move our light squared bishop. So bishop moves to d3. You notice how he plays bishop e2, then bishop d3? That's actually wasting time. He needed the bishop on d3 in one move. But now I play knight f8, which means there's no threat on my h7 pawn. So I'm never going to be getting checkmated on h7. And then now the plan for me is simple. I want to put my bishop on g4. I want to pin his knight to his queen. And I also want to play the move queen to d7. And okay, watch this. Bishop went back to e2. I think he's trying to break the pin. Now we play queen to d7. And anytime you see the move pawn to h3, you're definitely going to be going for the sacrifice. And the sacrifice is always going to work. So here's what my opponent decided to do. He decides to play the move pawn to b4. I think he's trying to prevent me from playing c5. So what I'm going to do is play the move knight g6. And this is also another purpose of this knight maneuver. We want to ensure that our knight is very active and in the game. So that way, the moment we prepared the sacrifice, it really hits them hard. So my opponent is not playing the move pawn to h3. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to transfer my queen over towards his king side. I want to play queen to h5, and then if he still doesn't do anything, I eliminate the knight, then take on h2. And if he tries to play h3 anytime, we're always going to be sacrificing. With that being said, he needs to play pawn to g3, but we already know, like, once we get them to move a pawn on the side that their king is on, they're already going to be in trouble. So queen to d3, I'm not going to take the queen, but automatically you guys should know that I'm able to take the queen, take the knight. His king is already all exposed. Knight h4 hits the pawn on f3, and I already have a very good game. But instead, I'm going to play queen to h5 because now it's even worse. He's not able to play pawn to g3 because if he plays pawn to g3, he loses the pawn on f3. So no, I'm not sure what's going to happen. This is like typically what you guys want when you play the Caro Kan, especially the Tartakov variation of the Caro Kan. So he plays h3, and as we explained, we're always going to be sacrificing on h3. Now, it's slightly different though, because my queen is actually on the same line as his bishop. So now I need to start thinking about any possible discovered attacks that he may have. For example, knight to e5. If knight e5 though, I should be able to simply move my queen to h4. But let's see what happens. So knight to e5 was played. I need to be very, very careful here. So let's just say I take the knight. Let's say I take the knight. If I take the knight, hit the queen, he takes, and then I play queen takes, and I'm threatening mate. That's very strong. What if I take the knight, he takes the queen, I take the queen, he takes the bishop? I'm just going to be ahead by a pawn. So what if I play bishop? Nah, bishop g4 doesn't work though. Because if I play bishop g4, there's bishop takes g4. Then I play queen h4. And his knight is going to be pinned. Pawn g3, if queen back to h4, there's knight back to f3. That's actually a problem. So I think I have to take on e5, which is kind of crazy. I thought I would have mated him from the sack, but knight e5 was actually nice. But usually when you sack with your queen on d7 and they accept the sack, it's just going to be leading to a mate. No, I'm just going to be ahead by a pawn. Because he took, I'm ahead by a pawn. And now I'm thinking about knight f4, but after takes, it's going to be opposite colored bishops. I like the idea of playing bishop to f4 then. So bishop f4, if he attacks my knight, I take. If he takes my knight, oh, but that's something. I don't want it to be opposite colored bishops though. Let's just go bishop to f4. Bishop f4, he has to find bishop to e2 here. And then after bishop e2, maybe, just maybe knight to b2 helps to not get the game in opposite colored bishops, because if he take my bishop, I take his bishop. If he attacks the knight, I trade here first. But he traded, so now I'm just going to hit the bishop. Now he has to move the bishop and protect his h3 pawn at the same time, which is not the easiest thing to do. I think he has to play bishop to g4 here. Now, once he plays bishop to g4, because I want to take on h3 and his bishop is the only defender, I'm going to play the move pawn to h5. This is like a removing the guard tactic. I'm attacking the bishop, which is the main defender of h3. And even after playing bishop to f5, trying to guard the pawn, I still hit him with pawn to g6. And once he decides to move the bishop away, then we take the pawn. Now we're ahead by 2 pawns, so it's going to be a bit easier for us to win. He attacks the knight. Let's just move the knight, check the king. And if he attacks my knight, pawn to g5 guards the knight. My h pawn is also a pass pawn. My rook has the file, and I'm planning on attacking his bishop on e2. Like, yeah, this is not winning. So king to f3, and I'm actually going to play knight e5 because we're in the end game. The goal is to attack the pawns, and he's not able to play c4 because it's a drawback mistake, which means he has to play rook a3, which is not a comfortable move to find, and it gives me time to play moves like rook to e7, doubling up my rooks on the e file, which means I'm going to have full control over the e file, while he has to ensure that he doesn't lose his pawn. Still not able to attack my knight due to knight takes b4, so maybe he's going to play something like pawn b5 first, but I'm going to be right in time to just double up on the e file. I also need to get my king in the game. I need to push my pass pawns, but that's basically my entire plan. So he plays b4 because he wants to play c4. Let's just double up on the e file. And then once he plays c4 to attack the knight, we're still going to play knight to b4 because we're attacking his bishop on c2. He doesn't want to trade, by the way, or he shouldn't trade. So I'm expecting him to pull his bishop all the way back to b1. But because I want to trade, I'm thinking of playing rook to e1 just to trade as many pieces off the board. So he pulls the bishop back. Now we play rook to e1. We're ahead by 2 pawns. The whole thing is to trade. He takes. Let's take it the bishop. Bishop doesn't really have a lot of squares to move to. So he has to. Wait, that's actually a very nice move. It's funny. I was trying to trap his bishop, but I trapped my knight in the process. I think I have to play a5 and then lose my b pawn, which is crazy. So if I play c5, he takes. I have to play a5, and then he's gonna en passant. I have to play knight takes, he takes, and I'm only gonna be ahead by 1 pawn, which I was not expecting. So now I have to be very careful because his pawn. Well, I didn't see en passant, which is also crazy. And the funny thing is, I'm now able to play f5 and attack his bishop. Now he has to pull his bishop all the way back to b1. And then I'm just going to start advancing my pass pawn. I'm not going to rush it though. For example, a move like king to g2 is good. So I need to ensure that I get my king active. So let's start with f4. So that way, if king here, I guard the pawn. And if king here, I guard the pawn. And then I slowly get my king in the game. Once he takes, I'm just going to play pawn takes. If he pushes, my knight holds the square. So his bishop and his rook is basically trapped. So he moves the rook. Let's get the king in the game. Pawn to f3. Let's get the king in the game. Okay, that was his idea. He wants to play pawn to d5, but we're still going to play pawn to f5. And now he has to pull the bishop all the way back to b1 again. And then we're going to continue to advance our position. So bishop takes. Let's just take. He decided to sack, and then he's just rolling his pass pawn. Let's go knight t5, apply some pressure here. Once I manage to get my rook behind this pass pawn, like I'm fine. I have nothing that I'm afraid of. He got his rook behind this pass pawn, which means the plan from here is just to roll this pawn up the board. But here's what I'm gonna do. Let's just play the move rook to d1, which means once this pawn moves, it blunders this pawn. And then once he pushes, like I could sack if I want, but let's just pull the rook back. Because the moment he plays c7, I get in front of the pawn. He hits the knight. Now I just need to not lose the knight and I should be fine. So let's just play knight to f2. If he takes, I'm going to take. And now I could push my pass pawn. He's trying to still queen this pawn. But let me give a check first. Remember, it's always best to stay behind the pass pawn. But he decided to play king to h3, which means this is just going to be a force mate. Because once I play knight g5, the king has to take because my rook covers the square and rook h2 is going to be a mate. So let's check on g5. The king now has to take. And that's just a checkmate.